I'd like to open it up for the open forum. So anyone come forward to discuss items not on the agenda? Anybody?
Thank you. I'll be quick, so you got a lot on the agenda tonight. First of all, I applaud you, Mr. Scott, for pushing to have discussion before a vote's actually taken. As situations why the disc golf expansion occurred on a consent vote without any discussion and no record of vote. I won't be staying, like I said, I sent a letter to be read into the minutes. I would appreciate it if it was read. One other quick item. There's a lot of talk with Joe Biden now being, he needs to take a cognitive test. Now, I know none of you folks come close to that, but what I'm thinking, the next election, if you work for a financial institution in the private sector or in the public area, isn't there some sort of disclosure sheet that needs to be, that's filled out when you vet a potential candidate? Like, for example, tax liens, bankruptcies, are you current on your tax bill? Are you change addresses? Do you have any complaints out there? Is there any vetting that's done, Mr. Chansky, to your knowledge?
No, Mr. Tufts, to your question, the only requirements to run for election in the city of Breezy Point per state statute, you have to be 18 years of age, you have to be a resident and a registered voter.
Okay, I do know in the cities are statutes that they have to provide all that information.
Yeah, so they have to apply, to file for candidacy, you have to fill out an affidavit of candidacy that pretty much gives your name, your address, your basic information, and then pay a $10 filing fee or get, I want to say it's like 100 signatures to avoid that filing fee. But those are the only requirements to file for candidacy in the city of Breezy Point.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Anybody else? All right, open forum.
Tracy Curtin, 31709 Greenstein Drive. Congratulations on the addition to your family. I'm actually up here for my family as well. We've been having some experiences living on the disc golf additional 18 holes. It's been quite stressful. We kind of live in a moment-to-moment basis of listening to groups come down from hole 4, some loud, some using foul language, and the only option that we have is to stand on our property and see if they want to make eye contact and change their behavior, or if they don't, they just continue on. More behavior, specifically to the public urination that we forwarded on to council, is something that I want to address today. Sorry, it's kind of upsetting. I'm sitting in my dining room and I'm feeding my 1-year-old daughter her snack. And there's a disc golfers coming on through, and one decides to leave the course after his group continues on forward. And from where I'm sitting in my home, I can see him walk towards the house, towards our property, not on our property, still public land, but actually just deciding that despite seeing our home and my husband working outside in the yard, that he walks towards a home and goes ahead and public urinates. Now, my kids run around back there, and they could have been completely exposed to that gentleman's public urination. It's upsetting. They're going to take their innocence because we have an amenity that the city has put upon us right next to our property lines. Now, our property lines were always there, and the disc golf expansion came in. So knowing full well where those property lines are, we still have the disc golf very close, so close that when people choose to relieve themselves, they still walk towards our property and then do so. We obviously didn't say anything to the gentleman. We haven't confronted anybody on the course for their foul language or their lewd behavior, but we did obviously call, and that person admitted to what he did. We didn't want to press charges because my point of all of this is so that our council can be aware that I don't even think the disc golf expansion is open, but already, your stakeholders in this community are having negative impacts on their family. It means a lot to me to be able to protect my kids, and I feel like you have taken that away from us in some way or another. I can't just let my kids go ahead and roam in the backyard, because where my kids would play, or even in the public space, this was supposed to be family friendly. Now my youngest one loves to run around and have his imagination, or my middle loves to run around and have his imagination run wild. And he runs back there where this gentleman was. Had he been in the bushes and walked forward, he would have been completely exposed, and there goes his innocence. And I know that you have children and grandchildren. I don't know how you would feel about this. Put yourselves, if you don't like me, that's fine. Put your kids in my kids' position. That's what I'm asking. Think about my kids. I wouldn't ask any other resident in Breezy Point to have to deal with this day in and day out. We had foul language coming through, and again, we didn't say anything to the individuals. What can I say? They're on public land. I didn't even know at the time if I could call the cops for somebody behaving poorly, basically. Now, I know that everybody says the disc golf course, is going to be private and blocked. Well, the topography of the original 18 holes and our 18 holes are completely different. I did spend time speaking to the stakeholders who live on the current 18 holes, and their houses in their backyard have berms of land. Berms that block sound, that even block vision. They don't see disc golfers. Do they hear disc golfers? Yes. The last 2 years, they said, they've definitely heard more and more disc golfers and more noise. So that's where my concern started. And that's why our family repeatedly approached council asking, please consider less holes. If we're worried about the 18 holes, can we just do 6? Can we just do 9? Wouldn't that make more sense to respect the stakeholders in the community? You can't control the people's behavior out on the course any more than I can. I have no control over them, and neither do you. So I'm gonna guess that when I walked the 18 holes last night again and found lots of alcohol, empty containers, vape pens, and cigarettes right next to our no smoking and no drinking sign, that we're not going to change their behavior. And this is a residential area. And there are lots of young children. If it's not my kids that are going to run into the next person publicly urinating and be exposed to that and lose their innocence when they don't need to be, I mean, that's behavior that happens at 2 a.m. outside a bar. This was 2 p.m., maybe 3 p.m., outside of my backyard house. While I was feeding my daughter in my home, I could see the man urinating. I guess I'm asking if you want solutions. I know you like to be solution-based. I would love to know, first of all, if you choose to have discussion, how you would feel about this in your house. The language, the urination, the drinking, the smoking, happening all up and down your home, your property lines. Does it sit well with you? Does it sit well when you put your kids in that position? And I would actually ask for you guys to motion to close the holes that are behind the homes. And I've proposed this before it started. When we had the chance to say, hey, we would like a redesign, I would close 1 through probably 13 or 14. There's 6 long holes back there to be left. I don't know if anybody has complained on that west side of the expansion, but I know that the east side has lots of homes and lots of small children. And I would just ask that you put yourself in that position, imagining your children there and experiencing that. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Rachel Curtin, and I have been living all summer at 31709 Greenseen Drive. And we also bought a lot last year across from that address. And I was just thinking while listening to all of this, so I've been living in that house, taking care of the grandkids. So I have seen all the disc golfers, what they do. Yes, none of us can control their behavior. None of us know what are they eating, what are they drinking, what are they smoking, how many times they urinate, etc., etc., etc. But here is the thing. We pledged earlier liberty and justice for all. Where are our boundaries with all of this? It is, to me, a very, very sad situation. We bought property here. Unfortunately, my husband is not here this evening because we live in Oregon. What is happening in Oregon? We don't have time to go into the detail of people not believing prevention is better than cure. Are we going to wait until some of these guys do anything or something to any of these small children? I've been a nervous wreck all summer, running after, asking them to stay away from the back. It is really, really, I believe, very unsafe what is happening there. I wish I could, I have until tomorrow to give you guys all the detail, what we've heard and what we've seen all summer. And to me, it's very sad to feel the way I am feeling because of what's happening in Oregon, what's happening in Portland. I mean, surely you guys know what's going on there. What is happening in Corvallis? I live in Corvallis. And there's so many of these things that it blows my mind. I'm a mom and a grandma, guys. Do you want this in your backyard? Please answer me that. If you hear the foul language, if you fear, are we going to wait till one of these kids get kidnapped? Don't tell me I'm exaggerating. We can go back into the history. How many times things like this happen where it's an unsafe environment for kids, and then we grab our heads and then we say, oh, we should have done something, but then it's too late. So I'm asking you guys, as a grandma, right now being here all summer witnessing it, please consider closing that place down. You are enabling these people to come there and drink and smoke and misbehave. You are, please hear me out. I beg you guys. I'm not telling you, I'm begging you. And I want you to never forget this evening that an old gray-haired grandma stood in front of you guys and begged you for the sake of all the children. There's more than 100 children involved in this, you guys. We are old. I'm old. But I have to speak up tonight, and I want you guys to never, ever forget how I'm begging you tonight. Consider closing it down. Surely there's other areas to do this, not in a residential area, absolutely on the very edge of a person's yard. We had no idea when we bought this property, this is going to happen. And I wasn't planning on saying this and then I'll stop. Portland is a mess. You guys know that. If you don't know, please do yourself a favor and check into it. Our son Jonathan called me one night at 12:35. Mooks, they are half a mile from our residence. I don't want another phone call from Greenstream Drive. Mooks, this has happened to one of the children in this area. Please, guys, consider me begging you. It's not about us, old folk. It's about these young children that needs to be brought up in a safe environment with the correct example. The world out there is totally rotten. We all know that. So what do we do to better it for the safety for our children? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Close public forum. Move on to 7A. Mr. Chansky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I have to come up here for this presentation. So this part of the agenda, kind of our big item tonight, we're here to discuss the preliminary 2024 budget and levy. Okay, so what's the purpose of this discussion? It's to present the city's preliminary 2024 budget and levy, allow for public input, and then look at adopting that preliminary budget and levy. Per state statute, every city and county has to adopt a preliminary budget and levy prior to September 30th of each year and then submit it to the county auditor. So this is a statutory requirement that we do this, have that set. As we've talked about many times before, a preliminary levy, what you set tonight obviously is not the final. You'll discuss the final budget in December. So another thing you do tonight, you set that final budget hearing for that meeting in December. The final budget can be lower than the preliminary, but it cannot be higher. So that's kind of the importance of the preliminaries. It sets your kind of your cap, not your base, but your cap of what you can levy. What we are not doing tonight is discussing property valuations. Property valuations, obviously those were considered earlier this year, back in April. And if anyone has questions about their property and their valuation classification, they should reach out to Crow Wing County Land Services. So first of all, we're going to discuss before we get into the actual numbers, really what we're talking about. So when it comes to what is a levy, again, levy is pretty much the amount of money the city needs to collect through property taxes to ensure a balanced budget. How we figure that out is we figure out what our expenditures are, how much do we think we're going to spend in a given year, and then we figure out what are our non-tax revenues. So those are the things, the money we bring in, revenues we bring in through permit fees, land sales, reimbursements, grants, things like that. So we take those expected expenditures, subtract those non-tax revenues, and pretty much that comes to what is the balance, what's left over, and that's what we levy. The city, we actually have 4 tax levies that combined, we take up that total levy. Those levies are the general fund, the EDA fund, the cemetery fund, and the debt fund. We do have a few other funds we'll discuss tonight, the capital fund, the sewer enterprise fund, the sewer capital fund. We're going to discuss those from a budgetary perspective, but they are not levying funds. So any money that goes into those funds is either through, again, a separate revenue source, or it's levied dollars from a general fund that then gets transferred into that fund. Okay, so property taxes, again, simplified. So how this works is, first you start off with your estimated market value from a cities-wide perspective. A statutory formula is applied to that. One of my former coworkers, finance director, she always referred to it as kind of this magic box where the estimated market value goes in. There's a magic that's done, and out pops the city's tax capacity. That magic's based off of commercial, residential, homestead statuses, etc. It's a lot of technical stuff, and the county assessor, they figure all that out. They have all those different calculations. Is someone a veteran? All these kind of things that they have to take into account when setting the tax capacity. Then we take the city's levy. Again, that's the money we need to tax to make sure we have a balanced budget. We divide that by that tax capacity, and that equals our city's tax rate. Okay. So a little bit about, again, levies. We set levies in dollars. So tonight when you set the levy, you'll be setting a dollar amount, not a percentage, or a tax rate. You'll be setting a dollar amount. Property value, how property values and the levy work together, they're 2 parts of an equation that to get to a person's taxes. The levy is the pie. I like to use the pie example of this is how much money the city needs, again, to have a balanced budget. What your property value, your estimated market value determines is how big your slice of the pie is, what you are responsible for as an individual resident. So looking at those individual property taxes, how that happens is you have an individual's property tax capacity. So the city has a tax capacity. Individual properties also have a tax capacity. You multiply that by your tax rate, and that's how you get individual property taxes. So using an example of what that could look like, we start all again from the top. Everything I will say from this point on, when numbers we're talking, they are all estimated. We have not gotten our final numbers from the county. We likely will not get our final numbers from the county until end of October, early November. So when we come back and have this discussion again in December at the final budget hearing, these will have the exact final numbers. But these are based off of numbers we were given in April, part of our preliminary. So everything we're talking about is kind of preliminary here tonight. So we have a preliminary estimated market value citywide of $866,555,000. Comes to an estimated tax capacity of roughly $8.9 million. Okay, tonight we're talking about a preliminary levy of $3,226,922. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of how that was made in here a little bit. If you divide the $3 million by the 8.9, you get a preliminary tax rate of 36.07%. Just looking at some historics. In 2022, the city's market value was $771,671,700. So we're looking at a $94,883,300 increase in the last year. Across that's citywide. Our tax capacity for 2022 was $7,988,768. So we're looking at a tax capacity increase of close to $1 million. And then our levy for this year, so it was set in 2022, but for 2023 was $2,952,739. So this preliminary levy that we're talking about tonight is an increase of $274,183 over 2023. Okay. So looking at individual property taxes as an example, we say someone has a taxable market value of $350,000. That would give them a tax capacity of about $3,500. So we take $3,500 and multiply it by that 36.07%. That comes out to individual city property taxes of $1,262.29. So that's just an example of how people's taxes are calculated. Again, what I want to emphasize here is city. When people get their preliminary tax statement in November, there's a lot on it, and a lot of times people jump to that very bottom number. But all we're really talking about tonight is obviously City of Breezy Point taxes. We can't control what the school district does, can't control what the county does. So we're here just to talk about our portion, which is the city tax portion. So with that, we're going to jump into the actual talking about the preliminary budget. This budget, and this is a breakdown of services based off of general fund. 44% of it that we're going to talk about is made up of public safety. That's what's police and fire. 18% is public works. 11% is administration. Land use is 6%. So that's your building, your planning and zoning. Parks is 2%, and all the other things, which is made up of legal and all the other little things that don't fall under one category, make up 19%. So, a couple things that we took into account when we were drafting this budget and the council discussed at your budget workshops on August 1st and August 15th. One of the first and really one of the biggest items to this is the Fire District Capital Improvement Plan. This actually was first presented to you back in June when a draft was sent from the Joint Powers Board to the two cities, Breezy Point and Pequot Lakes, to consider. And then it was formally finished at the beginning of August. Really what happened here is when the Joint Powers was created to create the Pequot Lakes Fire District, one of the initial tasks to the board was really to look at future capital. There wasn't a plan to replace the capital or our fast aging capital. Specifically, we're talking here about fire trucks. So the board has spent many months working on a plan. Fire Chief Mike Schwankel really led the district through that, looking at all the different pieces of equipment that the district has, the age of the current equipment, when they should be placed, estimated costs of replacing that. And then what they did is they looked at, okay, how do we spread this across the different entities, Breezy Point, Pequot Lakes, and then created that plan. So much of the increase, which is about 160,000, roughly, actually about 180 over what we levied last year, 1,000 when it comes to the fire district is related to capital. The idea with this, with the capital improvement plan, is you put that number in there, and then over the life of that 25-year plan, you can put the same number in roughly every year, and it funds the plan over that 25 years. And then the only adjustments you're getting year by year are general operations adjustments. And what you don't see are these peaks and valleys of this year it's going to go up $400,000 because we have to buy any piece of equipment, but next year it drops. And that way it also helps us as cities to budget better because we're not seeing those spikes in our budgets year by year. Other item to discuss was a full-time planning and zoning administrator position. This would replace our current part-time consultant position. The reasoning behind this, as was discussed on August 1st and August 15th, is the idea, again, it's about provision of service. We get a lot of comments from the public of problem with having the part-timer is when Jerry is not here, people still have obviously questions. Myself, Daniel, Deb, we do our best to answer those questions that we can when they come in. But sometimes they're just questions that really Jerry has to be the one, he's the planner, he needs to be the one to give a definitive answer on those things. Also, when permits come in, if he's not here, it takes a little longer to process permits. We don't really, what we pay Jerry for is really just kind of permit reviews and doing those things. He will do some code enforcement when things get brought up. But one things he doesn't do, we don't do active, comp plan implementation, zoning code reviews, things like that. So by having a planning and zoning administrator, it allows a person that's dedicated to reviewing those things to make sure those items don't just sit on the shelf and collect dust. We're actually implementing them. Also, it would take a lot of weight off of other staff members. For example, Deb, deputy clerk, office manager, she, because Jerry is not here every day, she does a lot of the administrative side for planning and zoning. So she does a lot. She does all the public notices. She helps put the packet together. Again, answers a lot of the phone calls. So by doing this, we take a lot of pressure off of Deb, which allow her to do a lot more of her extra clerking duties and other duties that she also needs to get done. This person would also be responsible for the short-term rentals, which Daniel and I currently kind of tag team. And so that's one reason we're bringing up. And with the council discussing updating the zoning code, we tried now it would be a really good time have that person involved in that. Because if you're going to update it and make that investment of both money and time, again, it's something you don't want sitting on the shelf. You want it implemented, and you really need kind of a more full-time person to implement that. The third big item on this budget is competitive wage analysis adjustments. Obviously, this affects all the departments, so I'm going to hit this here, and we'll mention it, the rest of the departments, but I'm not going to reiterate it every single time. So at your August 1st budget meeting, as you're aware, concern was brought up that the city was not in the position to be competitive in the current employment market. First and foremost, concern would be obviously retention of current employees as well as recruitment of future. We even have, for example, we have a police officer position open right now that's been open for 6 months? March, so 6 months at this point. I think it'll be 6 months on the 9th that position has been open. We've had it posted since that time and we've gotten some people have come in and reached out but have not identified a candidate and they've been able to make an actual job offer to anyone. Last year, the city did conduct a compensation study. And the deal with that study is it kind of went how most studies do go, and then it looked at comparatives. comparisons. So cities that are like Breezy Point. Obviously, the market, especially coming out of COVID, has gone insane. Anyone who is hiring employees or works for employers, hiring employees, it's very hard. You see signs out everywhere, hiring, hiring, hiring. And one of the things where we're at now is being competitive. We really have to look at who's our competition and who are we trying to draw from, and not just necessarily draw from, but again, who is taking the candidates we are trying to attract. You know, when we have a position open and another entity has a position open and they're always getting the people, we want people to also be looking at us. So that was brought up on August 1st. At that time, the council directed me to look at the city as a whole, and specifically was looking at the cities of Baxter, Brainerd, and Little Falls, as those were the organizations that are identified to be our immediate competition for positions right now. So I went out and did that, reached out to all that information is public data, worked with my colleagues in all three of those cities. First and foremost, as I described on August 15th, looking at getting all our positions down, getting what their positions are, and then trying to figure out what positions best fit where. From city to city, it's not apples to apples with each position. Each city does things a little differently. So when it comes to example, public works, a public works worker is not just a public works worker across the board. You look, especially when you get to the bigger, you get cities a little bigger than us, they start to really compartmentalize of parks versus streets versus utilities versus us, where all of our employees have to do all three. Our public works guys, they do the parks, they do the streets, and they therefore have to have CDLs, where a parks person in Brainerd doesn't have to have a CDL. It's pretty easy to hire someone, not a lot of criteria, to hire a parks person in Brainerd. But also looking at the all work on utilities. Trying to find a wastewater operator right now is very difficult. Thankfully, we have three certified wastewater. Three out of our 5 are certified wastewater operators who could easily jump ship and go to a Brainerd Public Utilities right now if they wanted to. So you have to look, so we really had to look at, okay, not just what are the job titles, but really what do the jobs do? So it required me to work again with my colleagues in those entities to figure out what positions matched our positions the best. And then we put up, okay, what were those positions paid, and then average that out for each position, and that was presented at the August 15th meeting, and that is available. All that information and that packet from the August 15th meeting is on the website. So at that August 15th meeting, we presented that to you, a couple different options on how to implement, but honestly, all the way ultimately up to you. The only thing the city was really bound to was a 3% COLA per the union contract. And after lengthy discussion, the council did direct me to include, they wanted to move forward implementing the wage analysis in its entirety, as they felt spreading it out would actually potentially take longer, and the other cities would also keep moving up. They just wanted to get competitive right of way. So that is the competitive wage analysis adjustments in summary. Again, all that information, what was presented and discussed with council is in those August 1 and August 15th packets. One thing the council did address, and we'll talk about it here as we get into the budget numbers, is that the cost to implement this is being, in this preliminary budget, supplemented 50% through a transfer from the capital fund into the general fund for this year, so that it wasn't a full big burden on the taxpayer, and kind of ease that in. The other two quick ones, annual insurance increases. So our health insurance always looks to go up. This year, again, we got a pretty reasonable increase. I think it was like 7%, which again is still pretty reasonable. And then general cost increases. We're just seeing costs for different things continue to go up. So again, as we talked about, we're going to first quick talk about non-tax revenues, some very quick ones. Small Cities Assistance Program for Local Transportation. This is something that the legislature put in through the MnDOT budget for small cities to help with transportation. We anticipate getting around just shy of $100,000 in 2024. Police PERA aid, that's something the state gives us every single year to help cover the impact or cover The police's, they have a higher contribution rate to their PERA account. That's our retirement pension for public employees. All public employees in the state of Minnesota pay into that. Because they can retire earlier and are not eligible for Social Security, they have a higher contribution for both the city and the employee. And so the state sends the city's money every year to help cover that. So that increases a little bit every single year. In 2024, the city of Breezy Point is going to become the fiscal agent for the Pequot Lakes Fire District. So we get to charge for that. We're charging $8,500 in 2024 for that service. Pelican Township Police contract, we've had that contract for a little over 20 years, correct, Chief?
Yes, over 20 years.
Yeah, over 20 years. In 2023, so this year, we negotiated a new 2-year contract for 2022 and 2024, which included a $4,000 increase each year. And then transfer in from the capital fund, we discussed that previously, for help covering some of those burden of the wage increases. Jumping into expenditure summary, outside of some of those big items I addressed earlier, most other things are relatively pretty minor adjustments this year. Administration, the big one is elections. We have three elections in 2024. Crow Wing County is awesome, and they do all the administrative side for us. However, running the elections is our responsibility, and so we do have 3. So that requires obviously my time, Deb's time, and we have to hire a flotilla of election judges. So say anyone here, if you're interested in being an election judge next year, let me know. We could always use election judges. We have 3, so we have to staff 3 elections, the presidential nominating primary on March 5th, the regular primary election on August 6th, and then obviously the general election on November 5th. So we have to pay our election judges for that. That's about a 15-hour day if you work the whole thing, although for election judges, just so you know, we like to split you into shifts. So not everyone is required to be here for the whole time. But if you want to be here the whole time, we'll take you. So we've got to train them and then pay them to be here. City attorney, there was no increase this year, but I didn't increase it. We increased it last year because of some ongoing litigation that continues to ongo, so we're keeping it at its current rate. Police. So obviously we talked about before, again, compensation, training, education, all those things go up. However, we did have some additional in there. One thing we discussed with the council on August 15th was having additional weekend patrols. So these would be additional patrols on top of the regularly scheduled patrols, specifically aimed at golf cart patrol and parks patrols. And this would be throughout the summer. Professional services, that increased. First, body camera, squad camera contracts. We implemented body cameras this year and then got new squad cameras, which were installed this week.
This week coming out.
This week, those squad cameras are getting installed. We've had the body cameras for a couple of months now. Last year, we covered those under the capital budget for police. Now, as these are ongoing 5-year contracts, those are going under professional services. Also, as we discussed with the council, looking to add some additional data storage. As all this is data, all this has to be stored, and it's a lot of it. So looking at additional data storage for all of this. And as we discussed on the 15th, looking at new tasers. We have 3 malfunctioning tasers right now that need replacement anyway. And so looking at kind of going, we talked about on the 15th, a contract-based, where instead of buying one lump sum, you pay for it over a little bit over 5 years. This is really something, it's coming mainstream, are these, I call them subscription services. And the way they kind of get you into it, beyond the fact of it's a little bit less each year, is by doing this is how they provide you that support. A lot of times if you buy something outright, they don't provide you that support. So we're moving towards this new taser contract. They provide the training. They train Joe. Sergeant Garcia is going to be going to a training upcoming, so he can be trained, and then he can train everybody else. So we don't have to keep sending everyone and spending valuable time training. He can just go once and then train everyone else, and we don't have to spend time away from the city to do that training. Capital, this year we only have 1 capital item, and that's the annual squad replacement that we have every single year. We have 8 squads. 8 squads. And we replace one every single year. That being said, we're gonna keep budgeting for this, trying to get our squads. We still have yet to get one of our squads for this year. So we're getting creative. This year, Chief and I have even been discussing looking at moving away. We like to try to have as unified a fleet as possible, but this year might be the year we look at a different brand instead of Explorers, maybe looking at Tahoes just because of being able to get them. Ford has also kind of dangled out there that they might not even take any orders at all in 2024 and just use it as a catch-up year. So that's something that's kind of ongoing. We'll continue to be looking at and watching. Moving into Public Works. Public Works, if you look at their compensation, again, all of this is based off of the budget and the memo that I had in the packet. You'll see that it didn't seem to go up as high as maybe some of the other departments, and that was because some of their wages and benefits and all that were reallocated to the Parks budget. This is based off of a recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Committee to put some of those labor dollars into that budget so people can see that obviously that there are labor wages in parks, and it's not just capital and other things. Part of that is we did move a seasonal employee, our seasonal employee, to the parks fully because most of their time they spent was in parks anyway. But we did keep about $5,000 in budget for a part-time person. The idea is to look at, there are some people we have identified who have the certifications at CDL that might be willing to come work for the city part-time. And the idea for that would be on times that we could really use that extra body. During a snowstorm, if we have, someone who's out, someone we can call in who can step in and do that plowing. If it's a really, really big storm, we've got everyone on hand, but maybe we could use one more hand, things like that. Gives Joe that flexibility to call someone in when, if we have another type of storm and their trees down, someone we can call in and just help, a helping hand. Fuels, I don't know if you've been watching, but unleaded fuel has kind of, it fluctuates, but stayed, I feel like, within a 20% range this year. So like with PD, I don't think we increased fuels too much. We noticed that it seemed right. But diesel still likes to be up there. So we did increase add some extra dollars in there for fuel under Public Works. Road materials, we had a little bit on the dust coating. Again, that's part of it's just what we're seeing in cost increases. Professional services, again, it's been under budget some previous years, so we had, I think it was $1,500 in professional services. And then every year we transfer $50,000 to the 401 fund, which is the capital fund. The intention of that is to provide money for future capital purchases, big pieces of equipment, trucks, so that we can pay cash for them and not have to, again, do a big levy increase because we need to buy a $200,000 truck. Parks and Recreation, again, we allocated compensation from Public Works. We reallocated seasonal wages from Public Works. Fuel, we created a fuel line, increased that based off of what we anticipate fuels for parks is. Landscaping, increased that budget slightly to do some more mulching around our parks. Professional services, that's increased so we have more porta potties, especially with the expansion of the disc golf course. And capital, initial discussion that was presented on the August 15th was a request from the Parks and Recreation Committee for $100,000 for capital. That was taken down, the council directed at that meeting to take that down, took that down to zero, but we put $50,000 in the capital fund should the Parks Committee identify a project in 2024 that they could then present to the council. And then there's $10,000 we transfer to the capital fund every year. Again, this is for replacement of future equipment, playgrounds and such, so we don't have to necessarily levy those dollars. Planning, zoning, building. Again, we already talked about the full-time planning and zoning administrators, the biggest change there. With that, we did put some seasonal wages in there. This is really kind of consulting wages, primarily, so should we move forward with the full-time planning and zoning administrator, that person can reach out specifically, really the intention here would be to Jerry, to have, if it's something that we've dealt with before, an ongoing thing, something Jerry might have history on, he has been here for a decade, that we can bring Jerry in and that person can consult with Jerry on those issues. Obviously, we have to provide training and education. We always want to make sure our staff is up and informed on what they have to do. Inspection services, this is our building official. We kept it as the same this year, looking at what we've been doing for building inspections, how this works for those that don't know. Our contract with our building official is that they get a percentage of building permit fees. So they're paid when they work. So if no permits come in, there's no cost to the city. So right now, I believe it's 90% of, is it 85? 90% of the building permit fee, and they retain, and then we retain the rest. And again, kind of the all other, we've talked about the fire district capital improvement plan already. Professional services, one thing I discussed on August 15th, and then more detail, August 1st, and then more detail on the 15th, is looking at software that's, calling it budget and transparency software that helps us not only produce the budget more efficiently, and it's not a bunch of just spreadsheets and me playing around with a lot of different formulas that's very time consuming, but feeds right into our ERP, our financial software. And the other thing, it has a public-facing aspect so that people can actually see and interact with our budget. It's not just a bunch of spreadsheets that, while compliant, don't tell a lot to the layman. But it's much more narrative, visual. You can even, with it, create for different projects, say City Hall, Bushman. We can literally create a page for that so people can see where that project is financially, and things like that. So that's where that transparency builds a digital budget book for us, which would also allow us to, in the future years, look at applying for the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Distinguished Budget Award as well. So that's in there. I will say, as we talk about when to get the sewer, that is a cost that is an annual cost that we have split 50-50 between the general fund and the sewer fund. Auditing and accounting, our auditing costs for 2024 are going up. Our previous 3-year contract has expired, so we're getting a new 3-year contract. That agreement was created right in 2020, like just as COVID was hitting. So now, after 3 years, again, it's costs across the board. Just as costs are increasing for our auditors, therefore costs are increasing for us. So we had that benefit of that old contract, but now that coming up, we're getting a slight increase on our auditing cost. This is also something that we do split between the general fund and the sewer fund. Prosecution fees went up $1,000 for the, and that was the first time they've gone up in 5 years. County Attorney Don Ryan does do the prosecutions for the city of Breezy Point. We are one of the few communities that he still chooses to do so. We really appreciate his services for what he charges us in 2024. I think it's $9,000. You would not find prosecution anywhere close to that in the private market. So we greatly appreciate everything that the county attorney does for us on that end. Animal control, that was an agreement we signed in 2023. I think a 5-year agreement that I believe it has a 5% increase each year. So we have that increase in animal control. IT support, slight increase based off of actuals. Building maintenance, I just want to identify that. We just kind of left that flat where it's been, since we're still having that discussion of City Hall. We didn't want to put nothing in there in case something does come up that we really need to fix. But we kept it pretty much where it's at for now. And then transfers to other funds. We do transfer money every year from the general fund into the capital fund for road improvements. We have an old debt payment that we've kept in there. What that idea was that we foresee taking on potentially some debt in the near future for either City Hall and or Bushman Road or some other project. By having that, it's already built in the levy. By maintaining that, we therefore already have a debt payment built in, so we wouldn't have to necessarily have a huge increase to the levy based on how much the city were huge to maybe no increase in the levy based on how much the city might need a bond for a project. So it's already built in. Okay, so that's the general fund. Really quick, there are other miscellaneous levying funds. We have the EDA fund. It's little over $3,600 that we contribute to the Brain Lakes Area Economic Development Corporation, or BLADEC. They help us with economic development related activities. Our TIF fund, again, that's just based off of TIF district reimbursements. We have one TIF, that's a tax increment financing district. That's for the clinic. So we have an agreement there where when the taxes come in based off of how much we call increment, they get reimbursed for that. It's an economic development tool. The cemetery fund, in there you'll see there's a recommendation of increasing that levy $11,000 as primary for professional services. So since essentially the inception of the Pelican Woods Cemetery, the Cemetery Commission has faithfully done pretty much a lot of that landscaping work. They don't mow the lawns, we have someone who does that, but all the beautiful flowers and landscaping as you enter around the columbarium, that's really been their hard labor that they've just dedicated their own time to doing. However, they've acknowledged that they're at the point where it's just not something that they can really do anymore. So they've been met throughout the summer and have made a request to increase their levy, increase their budget, to have a contractor come and do that work for them. And they also increased, they transfer a little money to the general fund every single year from the cemetery fund to help cover some of the costs the public works puts into the cemetery. They increased that a little bit this year as well. Debt service fund, there is nothing in the debt service fund as the city is currently debt free. Capital fund. So this is the capital fund. This is the idea of the capital fund is a fancy name for a savings account for the city. This is where we put dollars to be able to use on future capital projects, studies, things like that, so that we have money and we don't always have to be having these huge jumps in the capital or in the levy each year. Some of the projects that was discussed on August 1st and August 15th that the council wanted to put into this budget is $125,000 for updating the zoning code. Now this project is a project that'll probably expand 2 years. So that whole $125,000, would it be expended in 2024? Probably not, but we just want to put it in there so people understand kind of what that project cost looks like. While we're doing that, I recommended we also look at the general city code, so the rest of the city code as well, those administrative sections. That would not be done by the consultant that does the zoning code. That would be a planning consultant that would do that. The general city code would be myself and the city attorney, and he gave me a quote of $25,000 to do that. We mentioned that budget and transparency software. There is an implementation cost of just south of just under $12,000. One-time cost, and my recommendation was just pay that out of the capital fund. Bushman Road final design, should the council move forward with that after you receive your preliminary design next month. Per the proposal from WSB, that would be $280,000. We talked about also a streets plan. That's a streets. The intention here would be a streets capital improvement plan. So you would be hiring an engineer to look at our entire streets and sewer system, and look at what would it take over 20, 30 years to not only just to maintain and replace all of our roads. Figure out each road, how much it might cost, what order those streets would be in, and then that would come back to the council to decide if you want to implement that and what kind of, again, if you want to have a plan for maintaining our roads, this is what it should look like. Parks capital, we mentioned that before, $50,000. County Road 11 trail feasibility study, that's something that was brought up earlier in the year as well. Really the next step for that, if we want to pursue looking at a trail in County Road 11, is we need a feasibility study done. Bolton and Mink did a very high level one for the county a decade ago. And that was even just like, well, in the future, maybe you could kind of. Not a feasibility study by any means. What a feasibility study do is pretty much what you just did with City Hall. And someone's going to come in, they're going to look at the corridor, they're going to figure out, look at high level topography, what could it take to put a trail in there, what would it look like, how much would it cost. That's something you have to do before you can even really think about looking at granting and funding options. You got to figure out where's it going, what's it going to look like, and how much it's going to cost. That's what that study does. Scanners, if you come into our staff areas, you will see that there is paper everywhere. This is the intent of trying to get less paperless, and also in a day in a public, as a public entity, one of our biggest hurdles is always data retention and recording of everything we do. Paper data is very difficult. You have to find it. Just finding it half the time is very difficult, even if it's just 2 years old. If it's not filed properly, scanners allow us to digitally keep everything. If we have a fire, it doesn't matter because it's out in the cloud and we can grab it. Gets us a lot easier when we have any kind of request. It's much easier to find that data. You don't end up in the basement for 2 hours trying to find one document. And then we already mentioned the transfer from the general fund of $125,000 related to to help cover some of those wage increases. Okay, so very quickly, sewer fund. The sewer fund is what we call an enterprise fund, so it doesn't levy, it funds itself through fees. So the sewer fees that those on sewer pay fund the sewer fund. Biggest, again, expenditure increases related to wages. Audit that I already said we split 50-50. Software that we're splitting 50-50 with general fund. On the sewer capital side, two main big things. One is looking at rehabbing wet wells 6 and 7 at an estimated cost of $40,000. And then next steps in the sewer plant expansion, which we should be getting that report here soon, probably this fall, late this summer, this fall. While we're still waiting on that report, the next steps we have gotten from Woodseth would be looking at permitting. Again, this is one of the reasons we started early. We knew we have 5-6 years before we really have to increase the sewer plant. That's a big project. We want to get ahead of it. And one of those things is just to even expand it, you have to get permission from the wonderful state of Minnesota. That permitting process takes about a year. So you can't even start any kind of construction without doing this. So the benefit of doing the study we did, once we get some direction from the council, would we take that, say, here's what we're looking at, get the state's permission. We're recommending that we have Woodseth do that on our behalf, and they've given us an estimated budget for that of about $25,000. Okay, so that is a very high-level run-through of all the major items in the budget. Again, the full budget and all of this that I just talked about is in the budget memo that's in the packet. So when we look at budget expenditures on our general fund, $3,786,272. In the EDA fund, $3,650. Cemetery fund, $37,775. Debt fund, 0. Comes to a total levied expenditures or levy fund expenditures, $3,827,697. As we mentioned before, that is not what we're levying though, or the preliminary levy, because we first have to subtract our non-tax revenues. In the general fund, we estimate that to be $583,000. Nothing in the EDA fund, $39,000 in the cemetery fund, and nothing in the debt service fund, which comes with total estimated non-tax revenues of $622,000. So subtract those two numbers, which comes to your preliminary 2024 levy, and again, we talk about dollars. In the general fund, $3,203,272. EDA fund, $3,650. Cemetery fund, $20,000. Debt fund, 0. To a total levy of $3,226,922. This is an increase of $274,183, or about 9.3% over the 2023 levy. And again, as we mentioned earlier, I'd like to point, oh, come on, there we go. The increase in the Pequot Lakes Fire District contribution due to that CIP implementation counts for 6.2% of that increase. So well over about 2/3 of that is associated just with the Pequot Lakes Fire District. So at that point, Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'll take any immediate questions you have. And then after that, I recommend you open it up for the public hearing to give the public to have any input on that preliminary budget and levy.
I do have one question. The proposed expenditures in the capital fund for those projects that we've outlined, this is not dedicating that we are doing those, they're just budgeted items, so should we choose to do those, they are then budgeted.
Yes, and really with the capital fund, it's pretty much outlining that those are ones we intend to do. You don't have to do them. Again, with the budget, with the capital fund, it is cash on hand, so you actually could even choose to do something else. With all of these things, again, there would be council approval at any step. When it comes to the zoning code, we'll do an RFP, you'll have to come, you'll get a consultant, you will approve a proposal. You know, all of these things prior to implementation, you as a council would have to approve them, and there'd be multiple steps in each process. And again, you can get to a project and we go, you know what, based off things that are going on this year, we're just gonna decide to not do this one or kick this project this year. So you're not bound to this, these are just the items that we've talked about doing. If something else comes up and you wanna do something else instead, you can do that too.
Thank you.
Else? Okay, then I'm just gonna leave it on, let me get to, whoops, right there. And Madam Mayor, I recommend that you open the public hearing on the preliminary 2024 levy and budget.
Okay, I think what we're going to do is take a quick 5-minute recess. Everyone can stand up, stretch, and then we'll reconvene for the public hearing in 5 minutes.
It'll be good. There you go.
All right, so we will go ahead and resume. So I will now open up public hearing for the 2024 preliminary budget and levy. So if anybody wants to come up.
Yeah, I want everybody to make as much money as possible. So I'm very happy about the added income that's being talked about for our police and our staff people. I guess comments about the bond issue that's being talked about, and I also have first, Mr. Chansky, you made the comparison about cities. You mentioned Brainerd and Little Falls. Did you think about comparing, like, say, Park Rapids, which is similar size, similar resort community? You know, half the people leave in the wintertime to get what their pay comparison was by chance?
We didn't do Park Rapids, no.
Okay, well, I'm just saying Brainerd's, it's a different apple to a kumquat, comparing us to them, or even Little Falls. But, all right. First of all, the bond issue you guys have talked about, that $6 million, it's the highest interest rates we've had in 20 years right now. That seems to me to be kind of poor money management. Next year at this time, rates are going to be a heck of a lot lower than they are right now. I think that's something to consider before we get this bond issue through. I've also heard rumors, I'm not sure if this is true, that Pequot, the school district, is going to be issuing some more, or trying to get a bond passed through. I don't know if that's true. I just heard that a couple of days ago. I've been gone most of August, but that's all I got. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Anybody else? Are you sure? All right. I will go ahead and close the public hearing for the preliminary budget and levy, and we will move to a discussion amongst the council. Who would like to start us off?
I can start. Thank you, Mr. Chansky, for giving us the presentation. I know most of it was something that we were all given to in the budget workshop. So there was nothing new. Any questions that I had, at least, were asked at the workshop and/or followed up with you. So I appreciated you answering those. But a lot of those details were gone through in specifics. One of the things that Mr. Toff had asked questions on in regards to the wage study, again, just to go back to, as Mr. Chansky stated, we're looking at the comparatives of where we were losing to, as in regards to hiring new employees. He didn't elaborate on it, but with the police department, we had some candidates. However, they were offered positions within other organizations before we could get them acquired. So when we looked at the wage study back in 2022, and in 2018, we also looked at it, and COVID really threw the world into a whirlwind of wages. And when we looked at those, we looked at comparable cities. Well, now the marketplace is such a drastic change that from Breezy Point to Brainerd, we have some employees that live in Brainerd, that they could have a less drive and make more money down in Brainerd. So we had to be not comparative to what our like cities are, but we had to look at, if we want the talent and the dedicated staff to be here, we had to be a comparative to them. So that is another reason why that wage study was requested, of looking at Brainerd, Baxter, Little Falls. All three of I believe Brainerd and Baxter were for sure in the 2022 comparative study. I did not look back at 2018. Little Falls was not part of that, but again, that's why we directed Mr. Chansky to pull in that data to where that wage study was.
And I think just to piggyback off of that as well, when you look at, officers that we may have lost too, there have been, conversations about, well, why would I stay in a city if I'm making $3 less when I can move to a Brainerd or Baxter, or, so we don't want to lose the good employees that we have. And so, yes, we are not necessarily comparative in a lot of ways in size, but it's still a direct competitor. and that is the candidate pool. And especially for police officers right now, there is that shortage across the state. So it's not like there is an influx of kids graduating and wanting to come into the force. So we all have to be competitive, especially too, I know you had brought up in the last meeting, and I 100% agree with you about the patrols needed, especially with the disc golf course, the brush pile, the golf carts. Residents want to see that. And if we can't hire a police officer, if we have an opening that we are not making any offers to, like, how are we going to be able to add that extra patrol that we definitely need in the city? So it was really the only way that we had discussed that we would be able to be competitive, draw in the talent, and keep the talent that we have.
Also to add on that, I read in the dispatch, I think it was last week or the week before, Brainerd, I believe it is, doing another wage study. It was either Brainerd or Baxter. So what would happen in the past, like Michael would allude to, Breezy does the study, everything, and then by the time it's implemented, we're 2 years behind. And the same, the cities are also looking at wages to be competitive so they don't lose police officers, so they don't lose staff. And to also, Bill, address your question on the debt, at the workshop and the interest rates, I had the same question, because I'm thinking, okay, if we bond, is this going to be 6-7%? The consultant told me and our peers, in August when we had the workshop, it would have been approximately 3%, not market rate of what mortgages are. So again, good question, and I had the same question as you did.
Councilman Scott, do you have anything that you would like to discuss?
Specific to what?
The budget?
I guess the only thought that I have, and as most probably know, I think David even mentioned, you know, the initial levy can be lowered. So essentially what we're saying tonight, if the council approves the preliminary levy, is it's not going to go any higher than that. Right?
Correct.
To me, I guess the only thing that I have questions around or would certainly be on the fence with is what's budgeted for the planning position. And some of this gets into, I feel really needing to look at staffing levels, you know, any number of things related to the staff the city, the size of Breezy Point should have, and it gets into pay and it gets into other elements of employees' compensation. I think budgeting for a planning position at almost $85,000 base salary initially seems quite high. But you know, to me, again, those are things that can be further understood and you know, changed as we move forward. We're going to be setting the final levy hearing tonight.
Correct.
The plan. And that's typically at what point in time of the year again?
Yeah, so when we get there to the adoption point, there's that resolution we'll have you adopt, and in that list December 4th, so it's your regular meeting. So December 4th at 6:30 p.m.
I would like to see the council really, you know, challenge ourselves to ultimately get to a levy that's less than a 9% increase. I think everyone understands what inflation is doing to a lot of families and just budgets as a whole. It seems like right now, probably reasonable to plan, but at the end of the day, and I suspect our final taxable market value numbers will allow us to readjust where we're at as far as actual increase. But those just a couple of things that I guess I would share.
I think Mr. Scott did bring up a point that we should probably just elaborate too on that workshop. We did discuss the planner and zoning administrator, and one of the discussions that we came up with, and Mr. Scott brought it up as a staffing evaluation, which we have gone out for RFP that will be reviewing bids coming October, and that's to look at the whole organization in whole of where do we sit with staffing, where do we need it. And so one of the discussions that we said was, let's get that staffing report done, and our goal is to have it done before the December final budget. So if the report comes back saying you absolutely do not need a planning and zoning, we can remove that from the budget. But if it comes back saying you do need it, it may even say other things, but at least we're budgeted that we have it, because again, we can always reduce the budget, but we cannot increase it. So we decided at that point to leave it in, to see where that study comes back with, and go from there.
And just to, piggyback again, 6.2% of it is the fire district. So we kind of, we knew that was coming. And I know that, David, you kind of always say too, like, don't pay attention necessarily to the percentage, because the percentage doesn't necessarily it doesn't measure as well as looking at actual dollars. And then to comment on the planning and zoning, really again, and we've heard this from residents time and time again, I mean, our ordinances are outdated, our zoning, everything that we're doing is taking too much time because we're variance after variance. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to happen with the zoning code, and with the updating of the zoning code, it takes a lot of time. And if we didn't have a full-time planning and zoning person, that would fall on Administrator Chansky. If that fell on Administrator Chansky, he will have to give up, 60% of the things that you're already doing-ish, because it's so time consuming. And if we want our zoning and our codes done right, it would be in our best interest to have someone who has the experience in that role, taking on that lead in making sure that what we are implementing for our city is going to work for the residents. So for us, that was kind of one of the number one things that we had thought about. Well, we don't want Administrator Chansky to, because then where does that go? Whatever he was working on, half of what he works on every day, who then would have to take over those responsibilities? So it's kind of a chain reaction. So really for us, it's how do we get this done right for our residents? Yes, could the study come back and say, no, you don't need it? We don't end up hiring someone in January. That could be what happens. But I think for now, it's good to have that budgeted in, and then we will be able to make a better decision come December once we get that report back.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, I'll just comment. I guess I think everybody's already said everything. I think the preliminary levy is just a really good combination of careful planning on the administrator's part, and then all of us just coming up with good ideas, as well as comments we've received from all of you that have helped add to some of the things that we've put on the capital plan as well. So I think it's a really good preliminary levy. As Councilman Scott said, this is, sets a good percentage which we can come down from if we choose.
Well, I think everybody sitting here on council would like to see the levy go down. I mean, we do pay taxes as well. We're very aware of residents, concerns, but we can reduce it. And, that's what we need to do our work.
Right, and I think one of the other things, we are, like I said before, we are very conscious about taxes. We understand what's going on, so none of us up here want to, increase taxes for no reason. And one of the other things that we did do that I felt was creative and a way to not increase the levy, and it was when we had put the $50,000 into Parks and Recs, we actually took it out of capital instead of the levy. So I mean, a lot of times we do look at it as if we want additional things, we levy it, but we have capital, we have, some things that we can kind of move around to make sure that we are keeping that increase lower. So we're trying to find creative ways to pay for things. We're trying to make sure that we are looking at how to pay for things with grants. I mean, so we're looking at all of the options. We're not just looking at it with blinders on. So we want residents to know that. I think it's important, and I do want to recommend too, in the future, if we are having workshops surrounding money, I would, if you're interested, like, I would highly recommend staying and, listening to those conversations, because I think those conversations on how we get to our decisions, not just here's the decision, but how we got there is just as critical as the decision itself. And I want residents to be a part of that, and I want them to hear it because I think it makes a difference.
Unless anybody else has any comments or questions, I'm prepared to make a motion. So I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 11, 2023.
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So we are going to go ahead and move on to the items removed from the consent agenda.
Madam Mayor, excuse the consent agenda first. So
Oh.
those items remaining on the consent agenda, so, which would be A, B, C, D, and G.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, any other discussion?
Just a couple of questions. And I'm guessing this is for David. Page 1, Abdo. Finance Services, if I recall, was that the company that was going to come in interimly and help out until we hired a
So
finance person?
the approval the council gave was they did help us in that, but also keep them through December 1st or December 31st for any questions or any assistance Jeanette needs as she was coming in and really working through all our finances.
Okay, yeah, I really couldn't remember what the time frame was for that. And then on systems, just noticing that it's on page 3. Pretty large expenditure there. Is that in relationship to the new mics?
On
Guessing, or-
systems, just a second, please. The 3,000, that's 3,050.
Yeah.
That's just, I believe that's just the monthly support. That's what we pay them on a monthly basis for the month of, I think that's just, yeah, August, the month of August's IT services.
So that's an ongoing monthly cost for on systems?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Now we will move on to the items removed from the consent agenda, starting with the resolution 12-2023, implementing a salary plan.
I can speak to that, Madam Mayor. So this just goes into effect again, what we talked about in the budget of implementing that salary plan that was discussed. So that's what this resolution does. It's the same process we did in 2022 last year. We implemented that study as well, and I think the same process the city did in 2018 when they implemented that study. So pretty much that's what this resolution does, is implements that grid for all positions. Different than what we've done in the past in previous years. You might have seen, if those were around, grids were kind of a grade 1 through 10. As we discussed on August 15th, in this situation, we changed it just to be based off of positions. Instead of trying to score positions and figure out what positions go where, especially as we're looking at just competitive analysis, it is just position by position. We do have an 8-step process, so that employees move through. They take steps annually upon a positive evaluation. One of the things that the council also talked about, well, not an element of this resolution, is that with implementing this, we would also reset staff anniversaries. So currently right now, so on your employment anniversaries, when you take your step, you have a positive performance evaluation on your employment anniversary, you get that step increase. In this situation, we're resetting everyone to January 1st. So everyone takes an increase on January 1st. Again, following, we do everyone's performance reviews at the end of the year, and assuming everything they get satisfactory, they take their step on January 1st. Element of that is it did save a little bit of money because you don't have people taking a mid-year step. They just take the one increase in 2024 and that's it. And so, and then it's also just easier administratively. We just have to do it one time versus throughout the year, tracking everybody, and then having to give people all their increases throughout the year. Just made it easier from a financial perspective, administrative perspective, just to do it all at once. So that's what this process looks like. When an employee is hired, we take things into account, their experience in their field, in a similar type position, when negotiating what step they start on. And again, we try to get as closest to step A, generally speaking, as possible. And then, again, council approves all hires, approves what step they start on when they hire them. And then again, they just proceed through this process. So that is what resolution 12/2023 does, would be set that grid for the beginning of the year. And I'm actually, if I can, Madam Mayor, I'm going to address the second one too, because they're combined, they are close. So I'd like to talk about this one and the MOU simultaneously, if I may. The Memorandum of Understanding with LELS number 359, again, they are a union. So they cover all our patrol officers, and they do have a contract that goes through to 2025. So this Memorandum of Understanding is an amendment to their current contract. It would take the exact same study that we did, again, the results of that study that was presented on August 15th that is in that packet, and it adjusts their positions accordingly. So we have 3 positions, P1, P2, P3. P1 is a patrol officer, P2 is a patrol officer EMT, and a P3 is a patrol officer paramedic. Effective January 1, 2024, and in this case, 2025. What we did in this place, what we negotiated was that in 2025, they would just get the 3% COLA that they've already negotiated. So that is what we presented to the union. Also, their anniversaries would also move to January 1 as well. With this, they have already, obviously, again, it's pending your approval, but they have said that they have approved, said they would accept this amendment. One of the reasons why are we bringing this now? A couple of reasons we're bringing this now. One is because what we got from the council was their intent was to move forward with this. Kind of weren't necessarily, this is as of effective. These are effective January 1. And you do want to lock these in. If also talking about the police position, we can't change that posting on the wages until they've been approved. We're not going to post hypothetical wages. So part of that idea is get this done now. If the council does intend to implement this, these resolutions, this MOU would lock that in for January 1. And then we could also, our open police officer position, any other open positions, talk about the planning and zoning position later, or if any other position were to open up in the next few months, we would obviously notice what the current wages are, but then we'd also be able to notice 2024 wages as well. So that is what those 2 items are.
Okay. Councilman Scott, do you want to go ahead and kick us off since you had made the motion?
Yeah, and part of the reason I wanted to discuss this is, and this is not taking anything away from the administrator whatsoever, in the work that he's done to look at salaries of comparable positions in the area. But my concern is that I think this is in part leaving out similar recognition for wage increases for our officers. And a lot of what I'm hearing is that's where we're struggling. Right? I mean, we've had an open position for months now. We're not able to fill it. This, in my mind, really does little to increase our patrol officers' wages, if my math is correct. At least not in comparison to other non-union employees. It's not to say that patrol officers aren't getting an increase, but not to the percentage that other employees are. So that's part of my concern. And even at that, I don't know, David, what are your thoughts on when it comes to the new wage grid that's proposed in terms of how does it address pay equity between positions?
So looking at it, so go to your first, I'll just try to address both Councilman Scott questions. So on the police side, when we did that and what we presented to the council on August 15th was a look at every position against those competitors and what the average discrepancy was. So police patrol officers, it was 16.5%. For public works, it was like 20.1% for a public works worker. Every position got compared. And so that is what the council went off of, was whatever that percentage is for that position based off of those competitors, that is what we increased each position by. So whatever the average was, that's what we did. So the police officers got the wage increase based off of what the discrepancy with their comparables were, the public works based off of their comparables, and et cetera. So, one thing again we noticed is we talked about, originally on August 1st, it was partially brought up for about PD, and the council said, well, look at the whole city too. And that's when we realized, public works was actually even more underpaid. So that's where it looked at each position. Going back to your second question, remind me again, I'm sorry, the second part.
Pay equity?
Pay equity. I don't have really any concerns with pay equity, honestly, considering that all these other communities match pay equity as well in all their positions. So from a pay equity perspective, I don't really have concern on pay equity.
And I think one of the other things that we had discussed during this time, because I was not for just across the board, everyone gets X percentage increase. I didn't think that was, in my mind, I didn't feel like that was the best way to go. So it was better, I think, that we looked at, well, if Joe quits tomorrow, we're in a lot of trouble, and he can go and make, significantly more in Brainerd. We don't want to lose the good people we have here today. And I think that employee retention is, kind of that first step. So when we looked at all the positions, we looked at that difference, how far we were behind compared to our neighboring cities. And so that really was the basis of how we got to where we got in that workshop.
So when you say you compared every position, David, what did that involve?
So it involved obviously first going down, listing out all our positions. And as I mentioned in my budget presentation, then reaching out to those entities, figuring out what positions they had, because again, it's not necessarily apples to apples for everywhere. Even if it's the same title, the position's not even what they do. As example, the finance specialist position, like Baxter has a finance specialist, but when I looked at our job description for the finance specialist and their job for the description for the finance specialist, they're not apples to apples. So we had to look at, okay, what is it? Again, look at public works. Public works, you look at a maintenance position in Brainerd, which is their street maintenance positions, they have to have a CDL, but they only do streets. The parks people, they don't have to have CDLs, but they only do parks. They have utilities. Our guys kind of do all three of it. So it was looking at each position, not just the title, but what did they do? So public works, our public works workers in Brainerd, it was a maintenance 3 level position. That's someone who in Brainerd, a maintenance 3 on their streets department, obviously has to have a CDL, but they're also mechanics and they work on storm sewer stuff. So that's the stuff all of our public works guys do. Our guys, we work on our own equipment. When they can, they do as much of their own work as possible. Sometimes they bring in cat and stuff, the bigger stuff, but they all work on the equipment. Same thing with I think public works in in Little Falls, I think it was an equipment operator position, and in Baxter it was a maintenance 2 position. So we looked at not just the positions, but we even looked at job descriptions and figured out what were the best matches for what they have versus what we have. And that's how we kind of came to in Brainerd, for our public works worker, in Brainerd it's a maintenance 2, in Baxter it's a maintenance 3, and in Little Falls it's an equipment operator.
And to piggyback off of that too, and why it was so critical that we had to look at the job descriptions, is because again, when we look at employee retention, if you're a maintenance worker too, and you are making more than someone who is, working for our city, but they're doing less work and making more in a city like Brainerd, we don't want our guys leaving because they're doing all of these things. They're getting paid less in Breezy. I mean, it's more of that we had to look at a lot of different factors more than just the position, because again, our guys do everything, and so they do deserve to be paid equally in that regard. Does anyone have anything else they want to add?
We spent a long time on this at the workshop, and thank you, David, for, the analysis, because our staff does wear multiple hats. It's important to attract and retain employees, especially in today's environment. And this at least makes us competitive. Other cities are going to do the wage studies too and raise it, but at least we close the gap and can keep who we have and attract new candidates, especially since we're one officer short for, 6 months. And we don't want to lose any more officers, because if we do, that puts the city in a very bad place. We've all seen the smaller rural communities where the police force resigns. Granted, they're not a large police force, but all of a sudden they have no police. So it's important we retain our officers. And as far as the paramedic program and what they bring to the table, my neighbor had a stroke a week ago, and there were 2 officers that responded within about 10 minutes. And with North Memorial and what the officers did, they got him to the hospital, CT scan, and he received the medication he needed within an hour and 40 minutes. And that drastically, mitigated what could have happened, because the stroke, the damage was very minimal. So it's very important, and we need to keep, the officers and retain, just plain and simple.
Yeah, I just agree. I think we talked about it a long time, and thanks to Brian too for bringing it to our attention. Initially just first for, the police officers to attract the talent and retain them, but then through that discussion, that was expanded to the rest of the employees, and that's where it got us here today, so.
Do you have any other questions, Councilman Scott, about this? That you think that?
I just wonder again if, I agree completely with what Steve is saying. This is about, staying competitive. And I don't know how others look at the workforce and at organizational operations, but we're at a significant transition point. To me, it's more about just staying competitive. It's getting out in front of that curve that's always there. I don't know that this does enough. Maybe in some cases, like our patrol officers, goes far enough. And these are so hard because, at least in my experience, it's about looking at the competition in your area, but then it's like what was brought up earlier, also looking at, comparably situated cities to a city like Breezy Point as well. And it doesn't sound like that in what you were looking at, David, and the information that you put together here. It was pretty much focused just on kind of the communities in this geographic area.
So the direction I got from the council August 1st was to look at those 3 entities, because we identified those are competitors, because the one we did previously only looked at the comparables, the ones that look exactly like Breezy Point. So that was our old study, looked at just, Nisswa and Cross Lake and Princeton, not Princeton, we look at Princeton, but
Grand Rapids?
What?
Grand Rapids?
I didn't put Grand Rapids, but there were some Pine River, Pequot Lakes. Again, they were all Crosby, and they're actually not just locally. We even went, again, not Grand Marais. Two harbors, thinking even like Two Harbors. We looked at that. The only reason we included Two Harbors last year was that same thing of roughly the same size, heavy on tourism. So that is what we did last year, was really look at those, the ones that look and breathe and feel like Breezy Point. And this one was looking at who are we immediately competing with to not just recruit, but also keep our people from leaving us too.
The RFP that's out there for the staffing analysis, does that involve anything looking at pay?
Generally, those organizational assessments don't. They're looking at what kind of services did you provide, what positions do you have to provide those services. That's what those positions look at, is just kind of what do you do, what are you hoping to do, and who do you have, and what processes do you have in place to do them.
So I think if I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Scott, is that you think that this is a step in the right direction, but maybe should fall short of what we should be going for. So if that's my interpretation of that is going that, I'd almost move that we accept this as what we have gone into, but direct staff to keep the eye to the sky on what other communities are doing to see if we need to yet again reevaluate even next year. I know some of the contracts are coming up with other entities, so I think it's just going to be an ongoing thing for us to keep tabs on what our neighbors are doing, what the competition is doing. But I think this is a step in the right direction to implement. And
I will just say quickly, Madam Mayor, if I may, to Councilmember Maroney's comment. One of the things, if you go back to October of last year, when the council implemented that study, in that study, one of the things that the consultant actually said at that point was you should look every year. You should always be looking, not necessarily do a full-on study, do this every single year, but you should always kind of be looking at what is your competition, what are your comparables doing, so that you don't end up in a position where you're having to really catch up in a small period of time. You're just always kind of maintaining with those around you.
And as Michael and Rebecca had said previously, every time we do a study, it's approved, then almost instantaneously before year's end, we were 2 years behind. So I agree with Michael, accept it, but it should be looked at on a yearly basis.
So should we we need two motions to
So yes,
adopt both of them?
I would prefer two separate motions, one for the resolution and one for the MOU, please.
Do I have a motion to adopt the resolution for the salary plan?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 12, 2023.
I'll second.
Any other discussion on that?
So David, for the patrol officers, I'm just trying to understand what the increase is proposed for them in 24 and in 25.
So in 2024, we implemented so the P1, which is just the regular patrol officer, we implemented their grade based off of, I think it was 16.5%. So that whole grid got adjusted. And then per the council's direction, whatever step the step that the officers are on January 1 is the step that they stay at. And then P2, P3, those are kind of, I'll call those incentive steps, where if you are a P2, if you're a licensed EMT and you maintain casual employment with North Memorial Ambulance, you're awarded that grid. And P3, if you are a licensed paramedic and maintain casual employment with North Memorial. Quickly, the reason for the casual employment is because North Memorial, it's a partnership program where we say, we'll have these people, we'll require them to maintain casual employment with you. They then give us a lot of equipment. So our heart monitors, a lot of our medications that the paramedics and BMTs can issue, they provide that to us at no cost. So that's kind of that quid pro quo of, we'll provide you equipment, and then we're just helping them with essentially staffing. So outside of their regular hours here, they have to fulfill a certain amount of shifts a month for North Memorial. So January 1, they're getting that full analysis up, so that would make them in comparison with Brainerd, Baxter, Little Falls. And then January 1, 2025 is a 3% increase based off of what was already negotiated with the union for 2025.
So when
And
we
they
look
did not
at,
ask to increase 2025's COLA.
so when we look at where the offices are at in '23,
Correct.
and we think about, we look at what's proposed the start of '24, just pick an office, or what's that going to represent for a wage increase from '23 to '24?
So they're all different based off where their steps are at, but like, they're all, I think, if you give me a second.
Yeah, I know I'm
I would
putting you on the
prefer to-
spot, but
I can just give me a second. I've got a spreadsheet and I can pull the spreadsheet up. And I can give you, I would prefer not to name names unless you want me to. I can just give you a general range, across our officers. Let me just make sure. So you're looking anywhere between about 20.8 and 40%, depending on where they are in their steps.
percent increase,
Correct.
a 40% increase.
Correct. And again, those would be the employees that are already at the top of the grid.
So it
Can
goes
you, what
back
about
to
the starting
showing,
pay? Let's do the,
well, it just goes back to showing that that's how far behind the times we are. And as you said, that this is not even doing the right thing to this point. And
No, and it's not, and I'm just, it's part of the reason why I'm not, as much as I support what's going on here and the steps that are being taken to move in the right direction, it's, to me, not going far enough. And if we're going to start affecting, salary grids and wages and what employees can expect longer term, I can't get on board with this.
Some clarification what not enough means, as in we need to increase wages more.
I think we need to take more of a holistic look at, not only our competition in the area, but how do we sit in relation to similar situated communities. To Harbor, you mentioned, is a good example of that. I think it's a blending of that. I think it's making sure that we got the components of pay equity that's fully satisfied. I understand the idea of doing this annually just to see where you're at and the additional increases that you need to make. It just doesn't feel to me like we're moving to a place long-term that I can get behind.
And I think Mr. Scott's right on. I think it's going to be something that we should continue evaluating, but I think we need to take the step in the right direction. So, and if we're falling short, we'll reevaluate it and continue to look at it, so.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you're really going to be able to just do it once, unfortunately.
We've been here many times in the
yeah,
past.
and we're gonna continue to be here. This is just our step forward because we looked at the comparables and we looked at the differentials and we made adjustments based on that. I think that is a really good first step because we were able to look at how do we bring it up to be competitive. So I think, again, it's going to be an ongoing thing. And like, Council, Jensen said, there's always a city that's going to be a step ahead of us. So this is a good first step that we need to take. And then we can continue to evaluate it.
But if we know that's the case, if we know that's the reality right now, then this really is accomplishing very little.
It's allowing us to advertise for that police officer that we need.
Yeah.
That's one of the four goals. I guess I'm really confused that you're in favor for this, but you think that it's short. Why wouldn't we move forward with it?
And you want
I'm
to decrease the
confused on it.
levy?
Yeah, I guess that's just the way in which I come at and think about things. I don't think of just putting a Band-Aid on a situation. I think about what is the long-term solution to making sure that we're staying competitive, that we're not only attracting people, but we're retaining them.
I agree with you, but our levy's going to so you were expecting us to decrease the levy.
I
but
didn't
yet
say
you-
that, did I?
Well, you did.
I did.
You did.
You wanted to see it lower than 9%.
Yes,
From what was proposed tonight, correct?
yes. How are we going to do that if we are going to then increase wages further?
Well, I would anticipate that our taxable market value is going to increase quite a bit between now and when we finalize our levy.
It's a balance, but I think this is the first step that we need to take, for sure.
I'm not saying it isn't.
Any other discussion?
No.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Do I have a motion for approval?
I'll make a motion to approve the MOU between the LELS and the city. That's not is it a resolution number?
No, it's just a memorandum of understanding.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any other discussion on that one? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, on to new business. Mr. Chansky, ordinance on cannabis regulations.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So, item 10A, proposed ordinance 2023-03 cannabis regulations. So the council had a kind of a kickoff discussion on this at your August 7th meeting, where you did direct us to draft an ordinance and bring it back. So that's what this ordinance does. This ordinance looks a lot like, actually it's pretty much a carbon copy of the ordinance currently being considered by Crow Wing County. The changes are obviously changes things to city, not county, city council, not county board. The reason we went this route, and as Chief Sandell and I discussed it and had some communication with the county attorney's office is one, we felt this, as we really looked in this ordinance, remember last month we got it pretty much the day of that council meeting, so I brought it up, but hadn't had a lot of time to analyze it. But as we analyzed it, we realized it solves a lot of the stuff that we were going to be looking to solve in our ordinance. It defines pretty much everything that needs to be defined. And then it really took into account the different aspects of the legislation that was passed. What it does, as I outlined in my memo, pretty much does two things. It regulates the use of cannabis in public places, include a public park or trail, public street or sidewalk, in any enclosed indoor area used by the general public, including but not limited to theaters, restaurants, bars, food establishments, places licensed to sell intoxicating liquor, wine, or malt beverages, retail businesses, gyms, common areas in buildings, public shopping areas, auditoriums, arenas, or other places of public accommodation. Most of those, what I was talking about indoor, most of those things are already covered by the Clean Air Act. So those are areas where you wouldn't have been allowed to smoke anyway, and the legislation did talk about having to abide, still you still have to abide by the Clean Air Act. So that's where that is. It doesn't really talk about when out of doors, obviously specifically talking about obviously public streets, sidewalks, right-of-ways, trails, parks. So it's something that we had already discussed in August. What it does, there's pretty much two specific prohibitions that this ordinance does. That's that no person shall use cannabis flower, cannabis products, lower potency hemp edibles, or hemp-derived consumer products in a public place or place of accommodation, as described in the ordinance, unless the premises is an establishment or event licensed to permit on-site consumption of adult-use cannabis flower and adult-use cannabis products. That licensing is something that the Office of Cannabis Management will be kind of figuring out what that looks like as they form and do a lot of rulemaking in 2024. But we know that it will be allowed, and the city will be able to, and the state will license things. Like, for example, if an entity wanted to hold, a conference for marijuana growers, they could get an event permit that says within this area, people will be where they normally wouldn't be allowed during the course of the event. In this area, we will allow them to use cannabis, things like that. Also, it says no person shall vaporize or smoke cannabis flower, cannabis products, artificially derived cannabinoids, or hemp-derived consumer products in any location where the smoke, aerosol, or vapor would be inhaled by a minor. Again, that's something that's directly from that state statute. One of the things we also still have some questions into the county attorney's office is kind of how far does that go? When we talk about, say, like a restaurant patio, obviously that's not an enclosed area anymore. It is an outdoor area. Could a restaurant owner allow someone to smoke a cannabis product on the patio just as long as no children are out there, or is it they must restrict the access of minors? Those are things that we still have to work out. Again, a lot of this is kind of, I anticipate any ordinance that the city passes, at some point, there's going to be amendments to it. We're just very early on in this process. We do feel it's important to get something going, though, as use is currently, as of August 1st, is legal. So we need to start putting some fences around it, and if we have to, over time, especially as there's, I anticipate there'll be further legislation, further rulemaking. There might be court cases that also inform this, and over time, like with any ordinance, we'll have to adjust it over time. But we do feel like this is a very good start. Today, what we're recommending is, obviously, we noticed per the council's direction to have a public hearing on this proposed ordinance. So, Madam Mayor, I do recommend that you still do conduct that public hearing. However, because of that the county will be considering their partnership, their version of this ordinance, holding their public hearing a week from today on September 12th. We are recommending that after you hold the public hearing, have some deliberation, but don't take any formal action on it. We'd actually recommend you table action until October 2nd, just because what we don't want to do, what we wouldn't like to do is, if you adopt this ordinance and then the county makes some kind of change. One of the things that we have gotten from the county attorney is that he is open to prosecuting violations under this ordinance if the ordinance is the same or very similar to the county's ordinance, because he doesn't want to have to be looking at a bunch of different entities, different ordinances. So what we would not like to do is, if the county changes their ordinance, obviously we'll come back on October 2nd and say, here's how the county changed the ordinance. Do you want to change this ordinance in the same manner, or keep it this way? But until the county does that, we would recommend just tabling any formal action on this ordinance until October 2nd.
Including the public hearing?
No, I would say do the public hearing now. We noticed it. There may be members of the public that want to give input on the ordinance. Now would still be a good time. Plus, it would allow us over the next month, if there are any questions that come out of that public hearing, to have more discussion with the county attorney's office. We just know that the county attorney was on vacation, out of the office quite a bit at the end of the month. So a lot of these questions we were hoping to have answered, we just didn't have answered before tonight's meeting.
All right, so we'll go ahead and open the public hearing at 9 o'clock for the proposed ordinance 2023-03 cannabis regulations. Does anybody want to come up?
Hi, I'm a newbie here. My name's Vern Voss. I live at 6884 County Road 11 here in Breezy. You've all made very good points, particularly on expenditures and things you have to, retention and that sort of thing. And now you're talking about marijuana, and I would think that would be a good revenue source for the city. Obviously, as you're talking about, you have to have some set standards. What can you do, what you can't do. Like you were referring to, maybe particular events would be open to that. But like you're saying, you have to define it in that, okay, if you're going to allow that on the patio, then no minors are going to be on that patio. And you also have to look at it from a law enforcement point of view as well, because he's got to know those rules too. And he's got to know, okay, this is where the boundary is. And as long as it's plain in that respect, but I think we should open it so that bars can have certain times, and people are going to do it whether it's legal or not. But if you give them an avenue that is legal, more than likely that's what they'll take. And so I see it from the licensing of those who sell at retail. I see it from the point of, this is a resort area that people want to have a good time. And within boundaries, yes, you can have a good time. And so I see it as a source of revenue, like you're saying, that you treat it like alcohol and tobacco before, okay? Obviously, you can't be intoxicated and drive, you know, unless you're stupid. But anyway, the same way with establishments where they can have certain times or certain locations that are set for that, and that'll bring in more revenue as far as food and drink and tips and so, you know, maybe a little taxation on it can solve a lot of the financial issues as well, because like you're saying, obviously you have to retain your people. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Narvison, I was going to say, do you want to come up here? Can I hear your opinion on this?
Neil Narvison, I guess I'll be wearing my commander hat right now. It's Commander Restaurant Bar. So just to give you our perspective, and actually Councilman Jensen called me about this, and Brian asked me about this as well. From our standpoint, it's going to come down to liability. I mean, that's what it's going to be all about for us. Excuse me, I've been sitting in the back too long. Right now, my understanding is the state statute, you know, we also have these THC drinks that are floating around, and you can sell those to some degree in bars and restaurants. There's some things going on with that whole issue. But one of the things the state said is we can't sell somebody a THC drink and then sell them alcohol same time. And so from our standpoint, we're looking at those issues and we're going, that's a lot of liability to have. I mean, one level of the commander and the other level of the commander, and you go order a THC drink and then you go upstairs and you order something else, and how do we figure that out? And so we're just not doing it. We're not selling the THC drinks right now, and I don't know any other way to do it. I know for sure, my insurance company told me there will be a box to check on the form for our liquor liability next year, which will talk about selling cannabis products. So when I see that, then what do I do about, you know, a deck or a smoking lounge or whatever? I can guarantee you last Friday and Saturday night, people were smoking marijuana outside behind Commander somewhere, parking lot, cars, whatever it is. That's really not a problem for me at this point because I don't have to worry about them. I'm not doing anything in relation to that. But what are we going to do with somebody that's using THC outside and then coming right back inside and drinking when there's a state law currently that suggests that you can't sell alcohol to somebody who's taking a THC product? Well, the way I avoid that is by not selling any THC products and going, hey, whatever they're doing outside, I don't know. They might have done that on the way home before they got killed in a car crash or whatever it might have been that caused some problem later. But for us, it's all about liability. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in the bar and restaurant business. And so as much as I totally support the comments about everybody having a good time, everybody enjoying themselves, every you know thing going the way that I think the probably the cannabis world would like to see it go, for me it's just about what we can afford to do and what we can't afford to do and the risks we got to take and what that you know, there's liability that goes, as we're reminded in our alcohol training, that goes to all those bartenders and servers as well. And so that's the situation we're stuck in. And so for me, personally, it's almost better if there's a little tougher ordinance in the whole county, and we kind of live with whatever the county ordinance is, and we all kind of understand that. The problem for me always is, well, they're doing this over at this place, and they're doing that in Cross Lake, and they're doing this over in Jenkins, and what the hell's wrong with you, and why aren't you doing it? And that's where it gets difficult, and I think that, and I'm sure for law enforcement, it's difficult that way too, because they're looking at it going, you know, my God, how do we enforce differently in all these communities? So I I've just been in sort of that stay tuned mode, and I appreciate Steve checking in with me and trying to figure it out, and I know others of you have wanted to do that too. I wish I had a better opinion of it, but we're sort of stuck in that mode, and again, it's just mostly about liability. So that's
Thank
where
you.
we're at.
Thank you. Finally, you came up after all these meetings.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything? All right, we will go ahead and close the public hearing and move to deliberation. Anybody want to start us off?
I guess I'm just in favor of waiting
I
to see
mean,
what the
I
county does.
agree. I think it should be tabled until October. And then, you know, we do need to vote on it and move forward. As David said, put some fences around it. You know, thanks to Neil for, you know, his perspective on it is much appreciated. But that would, I agree with staff's recommendation.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point too, Neil, about, you know, the county having a certain standard, because it does get pretty interesting when the cities are doing different things and people are moving from city to city, and it definitely can complicate things. So I'd like to see what the county does, for sure. Table it.
David, the proposed ordinance, does this more or less kind of mirror what the county is entertaining, or?
I pretty much copied word for word the county's, just changed where it talked about county to city, so made it applicable to the city. So the reason we did that is how the county's ordinance actually reads. There's a piece on there that doesn't apply to us. Under the jurisdiction section, where it's said it covers the entire county unless a city implements its own ordinance, then the local takes precedent. So while this mirrors, in theory, you could say, well, then we'll just do whatever the county does. Chief and I discussed it. It's good to have an ordinance, even if it's just a mirror of the county ordinance. It's good to have an ordinance, a local ordinance on the books, so then from an enforcement perspective, the chief and the officers can say, like, there is a local. It's not just the county's ordinance; it's a local ordinance as well that has been adopted.
Okay.
It would probably help in the event the county changes something.
It makes it easier for us to change it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Any other discussion on it? So, I have a motion to move.
I have a motion to table the ordinance 2023-03 until October's council meeting.
Second.
All right, any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. We will go ahead and move on to the proposed ordinance for the cannabis licensure and retail sale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So ordinance 2304, so that goes kind of hand in hand. This one is a moratorium. So what this does is is on one hand, and kind of in one fell swoop, the legislation from the state said on August 1st, it's legal to use, possess, and grow privately. However, and then it also created the Office of Cannabis Management. What the Office of Cannabis Management is, they will be responsible for the licensing on the state side. There's obviously a board of a cannabis board that also is kind of the governing board. So that's all was created by the legislature, but doesn't exist. So they're having to start from scratch, find staff for it, appoint people to the board. And so at this point, what the legislation has done is it's given the Office of Cannabis Management and the Cannabis Board authorization to begin licensing pretty much when they are ready. Now, what we have heard is, well, we're thinking it might be even first, they're thinking, and, sometime late 2024, then it kind of turned into beginning in 2025. Now they're even saying maybe second quarter 2025, only because they're still get up and going. They have a lot of rule making. The legislature made a lot of stuff of like, well, the commissioner will figure it out. The Office of Cannabis Management will figure out these things like what does it mean in the presence of a minor and all that stuff. But once they want to start licensing, they can just start licensing. So what the legislation did say is cities may adopt a moratorium on the licensure and retail sale of cannabis until December 31st, 2024. So what we are recommending as staff, we are recommending you do implement a moratorium. The reason being is, again, while we don't think that they'll be ready, we don't know when they'll be ready. And this gives the council some time to be, and staff to be watching to see what rulemaking gets put in place. We do know that we will be required to have a minimum of one license for the legislation. But it gives us some more time to have a discussion of, do you only want one? How many do you want to have? How many, have more discussions with the public of, like, our current businesses who might want one, who's eligible for one. The zoning, you can put zoning in place within the confines of what the legislation said. So it gives us time to have that discussion with that protection of, in case the Office of Cannabis Management gets going faster than expected, we're not in a situation where we haven't decided anything and now I have a license application sitting on my desk. So that is what 23-04 does. Really, again, how these moratoriums are, we call them an interim ordinance. Section 1 just describes the purpose, the reasoning in Section 2, what the moratorium is. So again, the moratorium imposed on the establishment and operation of a cannabis business within the city of Breezy Point. During the term of this ordinance, no business, person, or entity may establish or operate a cannabis business within the jurisdictional boundaries of the city. And then what it also does, again, is kind of a restriction on all these moratoriums. You can't just moratorium someone that you can just say, we're just not going to do this. It requires a study. So that's what we are recommending and asking that time to do, is really watch, see what happens, see what other entities are doing, see what our neighbors are doing, really study this issue, so then we can bring a thorough recommendation back to you when it comes to the retail licensing. We know we have to do it, but we want some time to really figure that out. So we go into effect as of its passage and be through December 31, 2024. If the council figures out, say in June, we've got a recommendation to you, it sounds good, you pass it, you can then repeal this moratorium and it's done with. So you can always repeal it early. We just want to put it in through December 31, 2024, which is the longest allowed by statute.
All right.
With this, again, it is a proposed ordinance, so you also are required by statute to hold a public hearing on it.
Okay. So I will now open the public hearing for proposed ordinance 2023-04 cannabis licensure retail sale moratorium at 9:17. Does anyone want to come up to speak on this? All right, so we will close that public hearing and move to our deliberation. Does anyone want to start us off in this conversation?
I was just going to say, I don't have an issue with the moratorium. I appreciate that it can be ended early, if that makes sense. So.
I'm in favor of the moratorium. I think we need it to do it to protect the city, give us some time. It needs to be done, in my opinion.
Okay.
Nothing further to add for myself.
So just noticing in the interim ordinance, there's some exclusions or different things that are exempt.
Yes, so the legislation in there, actually, Mr. Narveson made mention to it. Let me figure out exactly where it said that.
Yeah, it's right in that paragraph above section 4. I'm just wondering if...
Yeah, so those are things that were already in statute. So we really talked about those cannabis, those edibles, certain edible cannabinoids that were already, the things that were already legal prior to August 1st, it doesn't restrict those. So the things that were already legal, it says, the legislation said, you can't put a moratorium on that because people have already been doing that for a year and a half. It's only the new stuff. So certain edible products that are sold at liquor stores that have already been licensed to do that, Those things, again, we can't restrict those, but pretty much everything else that's new to this legislation, we can. And to Mr. Narvethan's point, I'm not sure if there's actually any entities in Breezy Point that are licensed to sell edibles. Chief, you don't know any, do you? No. Okay.
I was just thinking that even with this moratorium, I mean, they could apply for a license and we would have to grant it if it's stuff that they're selling under the already existing laws.
Yeah, which is pretty much just edibles.
Right.
So edibles with it has a very low amount of THC that's allowed. But when it comes to flower, drinks, vape, liquids, anything that's kind of new to the new legislation, which is, I would say, most things, that would be restricted.
Do I have a motion then? Or do you have anything else?
I was just wondering if we know, is there a limit ultimately as to the number of licenses that we could issue? I mean, you said we have to at least issue one,
They only give minimums.
only minimums.
There are restrictions in there about like where it can be located, like can't be within 1,000 feet of a school and things like that. But what the legislation put in place was minimums. And to kind of, I guess, encourage, and we'll talk about this more and when we get into the discussion in the future about how many does the council want us allow. They do have things in there about, there is, even to the question about taxing, all the tax sales, there's a sales tax on top of general sales tax to marijuana. I think it's 10%. That goes to the state, and then there's a certain percentage of that they then redistribute, like it'll go to the counties, and then it'll go to cities based on how many licenses you have. So the idea was, in a way, is almost, it was kind of the legislature trying to incentivize people not to restrict it, was the more licenses you allow or you actually have, the more revenue sharing you'll get. The legislation also does allow for municipals, so that's something we can, it does.
Oh.
It does allow for municipal dispensaries. So something else we'll get into the discussion of in the future when we get to really dive into retail sale.
Probably wouldn't be hard to hire employees for that, would it?
It was fun, honestly, just really quickly, light note, when this came out, it was interesting, actually, administrators, we were meeting, we discussed, I wonder if it allows us to have a muni, and like, sure enough, it's in the legislation that cities are allowed to have municipal dispensaries.
There you go. All right. Well, do I have a motion to,
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed ordinance 2023-04.
I'll second.
okay, any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Planning
Madam
is-
Mayor?
Oh, yes.
Can you do me a favor? I have something I need to address. Would it be possible to move to the outdoor warning siren now?
Do you guys care?
No, that's
That's fine.
That work? Assistant Administrator Ike? Do you have those?
He's got them up right now.
Okay. Okay, so to start with, we have the big circle. Daniel? There we go. So this is the coverage area for our outdoor warning siren that's located at the Breezy Point Sales Office, which is at the top of County 11. As you can see, it covers the resort. It covers to the south portion of the city all the way down to almost Piney Way. That's kind of the cutoff. So the majority of those small offshoots in County Road 4 to the south are covered by that siren. Let me back up here real briefly. I just want to go over the statement I made last time. This is not just my information. This is from the National Weather Service. And that's why I included a question and answer sheet in here. Why can't I hear outdoor warning sirens in my house? Sirens are an outdoor warning system designed only to be heard by those who are outside that something dangerous is approaching. With modern construction, when you're in your residence, you will not hear an outdoor warning siren. They recommend the weather radios for those that want to be informed of weather events coming, so that the sirens are only meant for people who are outdoors. So the first siren, we have 2 sirens in the city. The first is up at the sales office, and the second is right in front of Eagle View School. Those 2 sirens cover the resort area, the golf courses, the campgrounds, and our elementary school. If we were to consider adding an additional siren, my recommendation, if you go to that last map with all the, other way, there's like
The
6
last
circles
one.
there.
You'll have to turn
All the way
to,
down, sorry. There we
There you
go.
go. So this was done in 2011, this study. Our 2 sirens are on this map. The other spots there are sirens that they would recommended locations. I'm assuming this was done, it's stamped by Federal Warning Systems, so they give you the range of where it covers the distance for the siren to be heard when you're outdoors. The 2 southernmost recommended spots are Pelican Township. And I looked at this, and I look at the intended use for an outdoor warning siren is to alert people who are outdoors of harm that is coming. So where in our city that is not currently covered by a siren would potentially have the most people outside. And to me, that would be our campground up north by 11 and 39. So Highview Campground would be likely the most people outside in our area, and probably the best location for that siren, which is listed on here, is the public access. So there wouldn't be, it'd be easier to receive an easement to put a post up and actually install that siren. So I contacted Federal Signals in reference to the siren. The cost of just the siren, the box, equipment, and siren is $30,921. That does not include the pole to mount it on, or the installation of the pole, or the wiring and hookup of the siren. So I contacted the power company. They said those poles are very expensive. I have not received a quote yet. They may be willing to donate some of the hookup fees or whatever. I have not heard. But like I say, just the siren alone is almost $31,000.
So again, Madam Mayor, members of the council, this came from a request from you all last meeting. You'd received a request from a member of the public to be looking into this. And so that's why Chief Sandell did that. I know at that point there was some recommendation, maybe using some franchise fee dollars that the city just got in their biannual distribution, which I think was like $12,000 or $14,000. I think it was like $10,000 to $12,000. So obviously, to maybe use that for that. And so I don't think we necessarily have a recommendation tonight to actually do anything, but here's, again, Chief put together that here's where we're at. And I agreed with, as Chief and I talked about, if the council wanted to look at in the future placing a siren, that north side probably would have the biggest impact when you look at where the population centers and who's not covered and who might be at the highest risk.
do you think it's needed up there?
And I hate to get into this too much considering my position, because as soon as they say something and it doesn't work, it's going to come back on me. But obviously, everybody knows that we have smartphones and more technology today than we did back when these sirens were first implemented. They were civil defense sirens, and myself and people my age were ducking under their desk in high school, right? Some of us know that. So currently, do they still serve a purpose, obviously, If you have people on the golf course playing golf, don't have their cell phones on them, whatever. Generally speaking, people are getting weather information from other sources now, so how impactful it would be, I don't know. The problem is, as soon as they say, are they the best tool currently? Some weather system comes through, wipes out cell towers, we have no service, it's 4th of July weekend, the services are strained, and these are battery backup, so they're always there, they're always reliable, they will always give an alert whether our smartphones work or not. But like anything else, it's a matter of, is the cost worth what you're receiving?
Madam Mayor, if I may as well, actually, Councilman Maroney actually asked me about this earlier today, and I was sharing, and it turned out kind of, timely, I guess. Talking about the cell phones and stuff, one of the things that I think we've tried in the past to get some information out is Crow Wing County does have, they call it the alert system. It's powered by a company called Everbridge. What it does, you go in, it's a subscription base, you sign up, and it sends you, anytime there's a severe weather warning, alert, it sends you a warning. And if you set it, depending on how you sign up, it'll text you, and if you don't respond to the text within 60 seconds, it calls you. If you don't pick up the phone and hit 1, it then sends you an email. And if anything, sometimes it gets a little annoying because it'll do it like every time it updates, because pulling off the weather service. That's something the county provides at no cost. It's free. They'll put in a lot of different things if there's an emergency, like I want to say last winter, I keep track of time now, where there was that pile up at Hole in the Day Bay. I'm pretty sure they even used Everbridge to say clear of 371 and Hole in the Bay. So that's something they will use as an emergency. The reason I say it's kind of ironic is Councilman Maroney actually didn't know about that. I think he's since signed up. I think he signed up while we were on the phone. And literally this morning, the Crow Wing County September is Preparedness Month, and they actually posted on their social media about the alert system. Assistant Administrator Ike plans on sharing that post for us tomorrow, so it's at the top of our post on ours. So I think I'd use this as an opportunity to get information about that, out about the alert. That is a great, resource that doesn't cost anything and really benefits, again, if you have your phone on you. Even if you don't have a phone, again, you can be checking it on the computer and looking at what the updates are. That's just a great resource as well, to be getting those notifications about emergencies.
Do you think that it would be, before even making a decision about something like this, like that specific area, like doing a survey or doing something where we're asking like those residents if it's even something that they care to have, because it really only affects that specific area, so.
You could. At this point, we're in September, we're still in storm season, but we're getting fastly approaching the end of it.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it's necessarily, in my opinion, something that's an urgent
Right.
need, that something we should pursue like right now. But it's not necessarily something that can't be looked at.
Okay. Do you want us to take any action? Okay.
I think, again, you asked us to bring you back some information, and that's what we're here to do. And if you want to provide us any further direction, or just table it for any further discussion at another time, it's fine.
Yeah. Table?
At this point, I've got no further investigation work. Again, the app was called Everbridge. Again, I was not aware of it. After I signed up for it, we did have a severe thunderstorm watch or warning that came through, and I think my Alexa told me, my Ring doorbell told me, the Everbridge told me. So I was inundated with this potential storm coming through. So it was nice to have multiple avenues.
Well, my wife gets mad at me for the alerts that pop up on my phone all night long from AccuWeather, Weather Channel, like Brian spoke to, there's notification out there on multiple apps.
Right. I agree. Right.
Yeah, I'm okay with not taking any action right now. It would be nice to, if you do get numbers on the poll, I guess it'd be nice to know what it is.
Have them, yeah.
Maybe it'd be nice to just keep on a list for maybe budgeting next year if we decide, if we want to do surveys and then, see if it's something that would be worth like budgeting for 2025. I don't.
Is there any
think that would be a bad
grants
idea.
out there to cover the costs of,
I do not know. I didn't look into it that extensively.
yeah?
Potentially, and like I say, the Growing Power would likely donate some towards us for that purpose. But he did say those poles are very expensive, so.
All right.
Yeah, I'd like to see it something that the council considers. I think this is a public service in an area that directly benefits, in an area that we live, people that are outdoors. I appreciate the chief bringing up that clarification because I think a lot of people operate under the belief that they can hear a warning siren from in their house, and that is not what, or how they're intended to function. So, and there's a reason why these signal companies stay in business. They're obviously selling warning sirens. So I definitely think it's a good investment. And again, where we have a lot of people outside enjoying the weather during a period of time where we get severe weather. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the planning and zoning administrator position.
Yep, thank you, Madam Mayor. So this really is a clarification item based off of direction, again, we discussed on August 15th. The direction was to put it in the budget. We also moving forward with the RFP for the organizational assessment that's out. Again, that is out. A little bit background. Those are due September 15th, those proposals, and then we'll have them before you with a recommendation, all the proposals, and on October 2nd. In the RFP, we pretty much gave an ideal completion of that of December 31st of this year. With that being, that's essentially from the time the council approves it, the contract gets signed, they get going, we're talking 2 months. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. I don't even know if, depending, I know we had one consultant actually reach out and said because of the timeline of when they were going to be due and when we wanted to be done, they actually weren't going to submit because it was too quick of a turnaround. They said, they give us if you don't get, what you're looking for the first time around and you're going to resubmit, then definitely consider us. But they just didn't have the bandwidth to get us a proposal by mid-September and then have the project potentially done by the end of the year. So I know we discussed during the budget the idea of having this before December 4th. I'm going to be honest, I highly doubt that will happen. And kind of what I was hearing at the budget workshop was budgeted it, but then we had this discussion about the assessment, but it was unclear to me whether we were waiting on the assessment but budgeting it, or we're going to move forward with the zoning administrator position regardless of the assessment. So that's really what kind of this position is for, is get that direction. What is it that you wanted to see with that? Being that if the intention was to move forward regardless, I do have a request / recommendation that we then actually start moving, especially now that you've adopted that wage stuff, start the process. The intention would be that the person wouldn't start before August 1st. The reason I say that is because a couple things I'm looking at is, one, I don't anticipate this is going to be a month-long recruitment. I anticipate we're going to get the position out there. It's going to take a month. We'd have to have the initial period would be at least a month, 4 weeks for the initial application field. We'll see what we get, and we might not find the right person right away. Again, this is a kind of a position you want to find the right person, not just the first person. We're not looking for just, warm blood here. So it could take some time. So the idea is hopefully we would have someone in time around the beginning of the year, we'd have someone in place. If you wait until January 1, the defect is they might not be getting into place until March, April, and that's like right at the beginning of busy season. They don't have a lot of time to get situated, learn the city, learn our processing, the staff, before they have to jump right into busy season. But for me, actually, the more important thing is giving an answer to Jerry Bonesack of what he should expect for 2024. Is he to expect that beginning of the year we're gonna have someone around the beginning of the year in place and he's gonna step back? Or are we asking him to be here serving in his current capacity until March, April, May? So that's actually my bigger thing, is trying to figure out what do, give Jerry, he served the city for a decade, deserves that respect of what should he expect for 2024? Whether that's, we're gonna start the process, hopefully have someone here as close to the beginning of the year as possible, or it's probably gonna be more like April, May, mid-year. So I'm just trying to get direction from the council, how you wanna proceed in that direction.
When does the assessment,
So
big assessment come back?
So we'll get proposals are due September 15th, so then we have to analyze them and such. So we're gonna have them before you on October 2nd. So hopefully on October 2nd, the intention is you just select someone. Then we have to, obviously get the contract signed and get going. So they probably won't get going until the second week of October if they can hit the ground running. And so again, I would not expect to have a full report before the December 4th meeting. My goal again would be like by the end of the year have a report. But that again depends on what people actually propose.
I really do believe that we will need somebody if we want to redo the zoning and the ordinances. I mean, I think that's
We
just,
absolutely do.
I just don't think that, I don't really know if we want you taking on that responsibility, because there is so much going on. There's Bushman, there's all these things going on, and like to have your attention directed towards one thing, I really do think that at least for next year, we really should have a full-time planning and zoning person.
I think so too. I think there's just a lot of projects going on, and, with the VRBO stuff and
Well,
all
and
that
the
too. I mean,
importance of redoing the ordinances. You look at Brainerd's ordinances, David has shared links, and the residents look at them. They're in English. You want to build a house, they have diagrams. So many lots in this city were plotted in the 60s. I mean, I sit as council liaison on planning and zoning. It's variance after variance after variance. And when we had the training from the attorney from League of Minnesota Cities in February, his statement was, if you keep having variances in the same area, you should look at the ordinances. You have all those lots in County Road 11 that are unbuildable. What do you do with them? There's so many reasons, I think, to have one. Yes, I understand it's an expense. People want their questions answered Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4. I know when I did our remodel project, it was delayed for a week plus. You have all your contractors lined up because nobody could issue the permit. Relieving, other staff members are doing what would be a planner's, job. So I think there's a lot of reasons to do it.
I've got nothing more to add. There's been discussion about having a full-time planner for the last 1 or 2 years now, because of the demands of the public wanting that immediate result, and it is where we're at now, and we're a growing city from where we were 5-10 years ago, and that's where we're at.
Well, and two, there's a lot of work on the short-term rental. I mean, there needs to be enforcement. There needs to be improvements to the web page so residents can easily look up a property address and determine if it has a license. And I think David very eloquently laid it out in the document. I really don't have anything else to add.
You said that Jerry's been doing the planning and zoning work for how long?
I believe he started, I think it was 2011.
But there's not been planning work, it's pretty much zoning.
Yeah, so pretty much what Jerry Bonesack,
permits.
what he has provided, the services he's pretty much provided to us, what we have him do, is he's here, generally about 3 days a week in the summer, 2 days a week in the off-season. What he does, he's here to review plans, permits, answer the phones when he's here. And, again, he staffs the planning commission. We'll do research if it's something that they've asked for, but, he doesn't, because again, that's not what we pay him to do. We don't have a full-time person. He's not actively looking at the code. He's not actively looking at the comprehensive plan. Because of his part-timeness, so Daniel and I are kind of tag teaming the short-term rental thing when the zoning administrator would be the one that normally would do that. So while it's kind of worked, and actually the city, I believe, if I remember correctly, at one point did have full-time people in these positions. Council's moved to part-time. Councilmember Moni said it has been brought up different times about moving back to a full-time position. But at the time, the council felt that this was adequate. But even in the 18 months I've been here, I've definitely seen, even this year, even more than last, just people come in, Jerry's not here, Jerry will be in tomorrow, and then just we get the responses from those people, and kind of that frustration of he's not here. I think part of it is in the previously, people just recognized that Jerry wasn't here, and they would just have to come in when he was here. I think we've seen it shift, not even just 18 months I've been here, but I've been talking to other staff members. They've also seen the shift as well of people now expect immediate service. They expect, as Councilmember Jensen said, someone to be here from 8 to 4, Monday through Friday, to answer their questions, to review their permits, to address, code complaints. They expect someone to be here to do that for them.
And we want people to build here. I mean, we want to increase tax base. And I've heard too many times it's too hard to build in Breezy, or it's too hard to work with Breezy. It's been a lot of comments from a lot of different people. So I think it's time that we make that investment.
I've heard those same comments over and over.
What is Jerry's intentions? I mean, is he okay with sticking around at some point through
I have
next year,
spoken with Jerry, kind of especially as we've discussed this with the council, keep him in the loop. He's willing to stay around until we get someone. He's willing to be kind of that consultant of if there's things we want to consult him in coming in. He has told me that as of recent, he is looking to call it a chapter. So, I think what he kind of told me was regardless of what the council does, he hasn't formalized this, but he did share with me that he was already kind of thinking that next year might be his last summer anyway. He hasn't formally decided that would necessarily be the fact, but as he and I talked about it, he agreed that maybe this is the time, and for both the city and for him, that it's time. Jerry came to the city after having spent 30 years as a city administrator for New Prague. So he retired and is a glutton for punishment, and then has spent the last decade with us. So.
Are you looking for a motion to approve the position, or?
If you are willing to move forward and you're willing to authorize me to begin that process, yes, I would prefer a motion that does two things. There is a job description that's attached to it, so we would need a motion that would both approve the planning and zoning administrator job description and authorize staff to begin the hiring process.
Do I have a motion on that?
I'll make the motion to approve the attached planning and zoning administrator job description and authorize staff to begin the hiring process for a full-time planning and zoning administrator.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Right. Any other discussion?
So, admittedly, I'm on the fence, and it's about timing. I think there's very little dispute that this city would benefit from, as well as residents, having a full-time person in that role. To me, it was part of the reason why at the workshop meeting, when we talked about having a staffing analysis done, that we went that direction was, okay, so we need a full-time planning position. Well, what exactly does that mean? What's the scope of the position? You know, given current operations and number of new home permits and X, Y, and Z that need to be considered, what are we really talking about? And that's the piece that I'm not sure that we have all the information that would be beneficial to have in moving forward in advertising for a position. Again, to me, that was all part of what I was anticipating we would understand and better learn through having that broader staffing analysis done. So for that reason, I'm not going to be voting in favor.
Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. Last one on the new business, the council committees. Mr. Chansky.
I received a request from Councilmember Scott. At the end of our workshop on the 15th, it did get brought up regarding some council committees. I know Councilmember Ball, you had that discussion. Really guided around, we've been having a lot of workshops over the last number of months, 5 months. Council has shared they really like that. You know, we have 2 council committees, as well, Personal Finance, Safety and Public Works. Each of one of those is made up of 2 council members. The idea of those are kind of advisory. They look at certain things, make a recommendation back to the council. There's nothing in the code. I even went and kind of looked into it previously that really outlines these committees, what they do, how they're formed, how often they should meet. And so it's really kind of been left to each council over the years of how they use those committees. And obviously this council has really liked workshops, which is something actually previous councils haven't done. They've kind of allowed it as the committees to make the recommendation, then just for the most part, just taken whatever recommendation comes out of the committees from those 2 council members. This year, Personnel and Finance has met 1 time. Safety and Public Works hasn't met. Primary reasons that they haven't met is kind of either a combination of either there haven't been items that really need to be discussed, or items that would be discussed, the council has shared that they want to discuss as a body, or just committee member availability, not being able to schedule a meeting. So at that meeting on August 15th, it was brought up about moving towards, there was flows that were there, the idea of looking at moving towards just having standing workshops in lieu of those meetings. And Councilmember Scott, just because he wasn't able to be at that part of that discussion, I just requested clarification. And Councilmember Scott, if there's anything else you would I left out or you feel need to be added or corrected?
No, I mean, I think you really summarized it in a nutshell. It's just recognizing that the mayor at the start of the year appointed council members to these committees, and being on the Finance and Personnel Committee, we haven't met once. It just called the question as to what are we doing with the committees? Why do we have them? Is it one of those things that I can just eliminate from having to even worry about finding time in any given week to attend? Or, yeah, I mean, how do we view these committees and their function, and what do we make of it going forward?
Yeah, and I think before this year, like, you know, I would have met with the, you know, the previous mayor and the administrator, and, you know, as the finance committee, we would have just discussed a lot of the things that we talked about in the workshops. And and now that we have the workshops, there's really no need to have those individual meetings, because everybody wants to be in discussion, so we can kind of all come to the same place, instead of just taking a recommendation from the finance committee and then discussing it. So I guess my thought is, with nothing to discuss, you know, it doesn't make sense to have those committees if we're having all of those discussions and workshops.
Well, in my case, being liaison to planning and zoning, you know, they have their meetings every month, but you don't vote, and I don't feel that I can speak on any of the variances or cups, because I should be speaking for the entire council. How could I know that? I think the workshops, a standing workshop is much more beneficial. Whatever we agree upon, we know monthly what it will be. And, you know, the committees may have had, I'm sure they had their uses over the years, but I think we should go towards just a standing workshop, and it could be canceled.
Yeah.
And, you know, this year we have a lot of projects as time goes on, you know, we might not need workshops, you know, but maybe once every 3 months. We don't know, but I'd rather have a standing workshop.
I agree.
Yeah, workshops were something definitely new for me, serving for the last 9 years. It just wasn't the norm. And yeah, I think it's been beneficial to have the five of us just discussing a round table and figuring out what's best, what's going on, hearing what, from the administrator. So I'm kind of in favor of, you know, abolishing the two committees that we had and moving to a standing workshop. I might even be bold to say, you know, might be better to have it during the daytime like we have been having, and setting that as a standing workshop. And if there's no agenda item, there's no agenda item, we can cancel it, but at least it's on the agenda for everybody to be able to attend. Even giving it a little bit more thought too, as today was first day of school, I almost kind of was going to bring up, and we're not going to discuss it tonight, but just an idea of, do we move our meetings to during the daytime too, and we set ourselves up for the first and third Tuesday of the month, and do we schedule it that 1 to 3 time frame, 10 to 1, just an idea. You might get more people who'll be able to attend that have families that want to be with their children. You know, we're a growing community with younger families that they might want to be able to take some time off versus missing their child's sporting event or, you know, arts program. And, you know, I noticed tonight it was, you know, hi kids, goodbye kids, as they come home from their after-school activities. And just an idea, but going back to the workshops, I like the workshops better than the committees.
Yeah, I think workshops are fine. I mean, I'm fine with not scheduling a standing meeting. I think that's going to be hard to do with everybody's schedules, but because so far it's worked fine to plan ahead when issues come up. But
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it also is beneficial because in committee meetings, you don't have the public. In our workshops, it's open to the public. So that's actually better because then the public gets more visibility into our conversations and into our decision making. And I think that that actually serves the public better than just having the committees.
yeah, and for sure the other council members as well definitely get more information when it's discussed in a workshop format than you would probably just from a report back from a meeting. Yeah.
Well, in my opinion, it would have been very difficult to get through the budget process without the 2 workshops.
Right.
It's a lot of information to, you know, retain.
We already have 3-hour council meetings anyway, so I feel like,
So
3.5.
at this point, I don't think I actually need any formal action tonight.
Okay.
What we'll probably do is, at this point, I think proceed as we have been. In January, per statute, you'll adopt your annual organizational resolution, and we can make that change formal at that point as well. So,
perfect.
and then just, if the council has consensus, we can just keep proceeding as we've been, and we'll just continue it to, you know, as we need to address things, we'll work with the council members, figure out a date that works best for everybody and a time, and then schedule it and get it noticed as soon as we can as well, so the public's aware of it.
Okay. Perfect.
All right.
Move on to old business on the disc golf course event permit.
Handler.
So, based upon your guys' comment at the last council meeting, we went through and made some adjustments to the permit, kind of simplified it down, removed some of the fluff, made it more specific to the disc golf course as a whole rather than as all the cities. And we were kind of bringing it back just to see what you guys thought about it this way, if there was any other additional changes you need. Additionally, you guys voiced you wanted some more actual kind of, maybe like a graph or something with some stuff around the area that gave a little more idea of what pricing is. I will say I went back through the data I already had. You'll find, generally speaking, most municipalities across the state of Minnesota that do have public disc golf courses, they don't really charge at all. So it is a little bit hard to find exact comparables just because most of the public ones are public, they're free, and if somebody wanted to have a tournament on it, they'd be like, yeah, okay. And they just wouldn't regulate it, they wouldn't care about it, and they'd just let it be. That being said, most of those courses are also, smaller courses that are kind of flatter than what we have. So there's some trouble with that. But based upon the information I had here, I reached out to these municipalities to verify all this information to kind of see what it is. You'll see there's some patterns there. They don't actually charge out like the use of the disc golf course, but like a pavilion on the course can be reserved. And then they go out from there and do other things like that. But I sort of kind of, based upon comments from last meeting, figured there seemed to be kind of a consensus maybe that $250 per course was maybe a bit high. So I lowered it down to $100 per course. Wanted to see if that was maybe a little more comfortable, or if you think that's too low or you want to adjust that, we can change that around. Like I said, generally cleaned it up. It still has, sections A and B, basic information for applicant, event information so that people know exactly what it is. Parking plan, if we would require a parking plan essentially, or at least them to give me some kind of a map so that we have some sense of, if you're going to have 200 people there, where are they parking? So that we get a better sense of that. If they're going to be serving food and beverages, I make a note here in event cleanup and sanitation that there is on-site trash, but if you're going to have a lot of people, you guys could as a body say, hey, you need to provide additional sanitation services. You've got too many people there. We don't feel comfortable that we will be able to meet your disposal needs. Sale of items and vendors, and then just liability insurance. Like I said, much shorter than the last one, kind of pared down to the basics here based upon what you guys had said. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to start really quick because I do want to refer to Mr. Toff's comment earlier. He does serve on the Park and Rec Committee, and he had sent an email to us regarding this and regarding pricing. And I do feel that this needs to go back to Park and Rec. They need to review this. They need to make a decision and come back to us with the recommendation, especially when it comes down to these little tiny details about garbage and everything else. I really think that, the reason that we expanded that board, that committee, and just, what they're there to do, I think this is absolutely should be run through their committee before it's presented back to us in their recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I would agree to that also, but I also think there's more conversation that they need to have. Are tournaments going to be allowed? What are the number of tournaments? Will the public be able to use the courses? I mean, there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had. And as far as fees go, I think these are professional disc golf tournaments with several thousand dollars of prize money. I think that changes the fee schedule drastically. I'm also to what Brad had said, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 council meetings ago, but when we talked about this, is it fair for the public to not be able to use these courses? I mean, we've all talked about this was built and paid for by the taxpayers in the surrounding communities, and it's public course. Should you allow somebody to exclusively use it for 1 or 2 days, several times a year? So things like that, Park and Rec needs to define, bring it to the council. Fees, the event permit, I think it's much improved. Thank you, Daniel.
Yes, thank you.
But there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had, and also the discussion at Parks and Recs, per Tracy Curtin's presentation, that's unacceptable. somebody urinating, you know, and somebody can see it from their house. I mean, especially their lot, the way it is. You know, there's enforcement. You know, how do we curb this? You know, you can't have somebody camped out 24/7, you know, all weekend long, but there's other issues, you know, that need to be addressed. And I think her point was well taken. The original course had berms and it did not impact the property owners on the course. This one was different. And then that's personally why I proposed 9 holes. And we're not even really using the course. What's going to happen, you know, once summer starts and it's, you know, in constant use? So there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, I think.
And that's where the process of it really just needs to go through them
Correct.
first, and then we will address the issues, but it can't come to us first, because again, I want to utilize them. They're, you know, they're all very willing to take the time to do, you know, to talk to people, to go through this. So they're there, and I want to utilize them and then have it come back to us.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to hear the recommendation. And again, after we get the recommendation, there's still be extensive discussion here, but on those points, but.
And I had asked Mr. Toft earlier, I never got a response yet. I thought it would be nice then if they are making a recommendation, it not go through maybe the administrator, but have zeroed in, you know, come up and give us a recap of their conversation, and then have that kind of them make that recommendation to us. Because then they can give us the details, right? They could say, here's what we talked about, here's some of the concerns here, you know, then it's like coming from them, and it's like an ownership that they can take on, and I think I want to see that from them. So just a conversation maybe to have on like how we receive that information from them, so it's not lost in translation or things aren't forgotten to be said to us that maybe came out of those meetings. I think that communication would be greatly improved if that process was then, you know, cut down and they came to the podium and made the recommendations to us directly.
And they can work with staff on a presentation.
Yeah, for
But I
sure.
agree, it should be that way. I think that, you know, the chairperson, you know, can work with staff on a presentation, but that should be brought forth to the council. I don't know if that's ever been done, but I think it's.
It was just an idea that I had today that I just, you know, communication is hard when it's when it's gone through multiple people and then it kind of comes back to us, and that's less on you too, to have to present as well.
I think, you know, serving on the Parks and Board, and, you know, I could certainly be that voice there potentially. I think asking a Parks and Board member to present might be overstepping a little bit. If they were willing to, go for it, and that would be a recommended, but otherwise, I think we can have staff present based on it. We can all review the meeting online to see exactly what was discussed. Because you get one person who's gonna, let's just say the chair will come up and maybe it was a 5-2 vote. And so therefore the person who was against it really wanted to pitch that. I think it just needs to be factual information.
But she can then present the whole thing, like it was a 5-2 vote.
And that's where I go back, I think it's staff's position to do that. That's asking a lot for Park and Rec to come back and ask. If they want to present, go for it. But if they don't, if they're like, you know what, this is what our recommendation is and let staff present it, that's also their prerogative.
But I've heard also from multiple people on the committee that what they felt that we would get as far as information, we didn't get. So that, again, there's something that's getting lost in the translation of like what they kind of are doing to then when we receive the information, because it's not being translated the way, and maybe it's you, maybe then you are the person that relays it back to us. I mean, I think that, again, there's an ownership, and in Bill's email, he made a reference to why do we have a committee if we are given no responsibility? And I just think that is the responsibility then that we could be giving them. I know it's staff is the way we always have done it, but, you know, we're trying new things. And I think that, again, building up the committees as having that ownership might help improve how we receive the information.
And maybe that's how that report comes back too, because in the past, I think it's been very minimal what we've gotten back from those committees.
Yeah.
And, you know, unfortunately, that makes you not want to send things to them because nothing goes anywhere, and you don't get anything back. So I don't know if it's restructuring how that, whatever's decided comes back, or there's a very clear agenda. I know you were working on that, David, trying to help that group kind of come together more as far as being more organized and having agendas and things to discuss. So, that maybe would help too. But
Yeah, we got to give them time to group and really like become a committee and give us, I think we need to build that up. And if we want it to work, we can't just, leave them out in a lot of the discussion, which I think they feel like that's kind of happening. Not intentionally, of course. But
In regards to the permit application, I got no problem sending that back to them. I'm really glad we streamlined it down as a council before we actually passed back what we had last month. So I'm glad that we redirected focus to just the disc golf course for them to discuss.
okay. Do we need a motion for that? Okay. Do I have a motion to send it back? Send it to,
I'll make that motion to send the discussion on the disc golf course event permit, including those points made by Councilman Jensen, back to the Parks and Rec Committee.
can I add, okay, is there a second?
I'll second. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'll second.
Okay, and then discussion, I would also to kind of add is what is the ask, right? Like, so for them, I feel like maybe we could even highlight what it is that we're asking them to do. Can we do that do we have to do that right now, or can we talk with you about bullet points of like, here is what the council's looking for? Like, we want you to answer these questions and send it back to us as far as.
So right now, with this direction, we'll be working on their packet on Friday.
Okay,
So they'll discuss this next Thursday.
okay.
So
I think we said fee, how many?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, can we give you the bullet points and details of what we're asking of them? And
be giving me those bullet points.
I don't know, that's what I mean,
As I'm saying, if we're
Yeah.
we're gonna put this in a packet on Friday.
okay,
So if you're all not gonna give me the bullet points now,
So you want them now, right?
okay.
Yeah,
am I getting?
that's fine.
As I'm just saying,
That's
how am I
fair.
getting the bullet points?
Yeah, no, I understand. That's why I brought it up, because I want them to be very clear, because a lot of times.
I would
when we
rather
send
hear it from you as a body of what,
Okay.
and then that we can just tell the council, this is what the council wants you
So
to
why
answer.
don't you go ahead and you ran through a bunch of things that you said that you wanted to see from them, so why
Well,
don't
I
you go
think
ahead and.
enforcement, I mean, we've talked about and budgeted for extra police, but after, Tracy Curtin's presentation, and, I mean,
I think the
And-
patrol's budgeted for
Yeah.
two, I mean, potentially as part of the capital
but
fund.
it's like 3 hours, a certain time of the weekend, but I mean,
Ideally.
alcohol, smoking, how to, tournaments, because the disc golf club, they were going to hold 2 one-day tournaments, totally separate formats. One was the equivalent of golf best ball. Second one was the fall classic or whatever that they typically have. When council was told there was just going to be 2 tournaments allowed. So to define, what is a tournament? Is the tournament, 1 day? Is it 2 days? The number of tournaments that the city is going to allow and which course the tournaments are going to be on. Is it on the legacy course? Is it on the expansion? Number of people for tournaments. I mean, there was talk that there could be 150 participants.
They should request financials though. So here's the other thing with the tournaments, right? When you have a tournament and there's money that's collected, okay, there's still operating costs, right, that they have. So it would be nice to know how much, the financials of the tournaments, right? They're paying people out, right? So what is left? Because we can't just say, oh, they bring in $4,000, so we're just going to charge them $1,000. Well, that's not realistic if they, as an organization, if they're payouts. So I think that should be requested before making a decision about.
Well, and then are we going to deny the public use to these courses? I think that's a huge question.
And what other, I would say, with that though, is we need to look at other around us, because Brainerd, the brand new park that they just built, yeah, $150 you get when you reserve it. Nobody else can use the bathrooms, nobody else can be on it. So to just say, oh, well, it's not fair that it's reserved and you don't get to use it. Well, there's plenty of places around our area that when you reserve it, nobody else gets to use it. So they really need to look at both sides of that. And
Oh, absolutely,
I think
but
for the right fee too, that can be, it's a revenue stream for the city to maintain that course. I think, there's some.
but my fear is on that expansion course, you've got 150 people playing 2 days in a row, those chains clanking for 8-9 hours a day. The properties are that much closer, the sound travels,
we need the silencer. So again,
And silencer,
we need them to go through all of these little things that have been discussed. When are the silencers going to be on, right? They need to go and actually figure out too the information that, we can't always be responsible for that.
But that was promised by the Breezy Point Disc Golf Club. They were gonna put up some type of wooden structure to block pads from residents' view. But again, the city never agreed to any of these. That was the disc golf course going out and talking to residents and saying that this would be done when, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, the city never agreed to install silencers. The city never agreed to put up dividers or some type of structure blocking. The city never agreed to plant trees. And unfortunately, the city, in my opinion, should have taken the lead and just said, we're not committed to this. So now you have all this information that went out to residents and none of it ever happened.
Anything else that you can think of that we want them to do?
Not off the top of my head.
If you think of anything, then just maybe email them to David. Are you good with that?
Yeah, I've got nothing further to add.
Okay. Do you need a?
So you already have a motion, a second, so.
Yep, all in favor of sending it back?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, staff reports?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I just have one quick thing for myself. A little update on the Pequot Lakes Fire District Joint Powers Board. In their capital plan that was updated, they included the acquisition of a ladder truck. The intention would be to remove, what they did is they took out an engine and a tender from the plan and replaced it with the ladders. The idea was you'd replace it, you would take 2 vehicles out and add 1 because the ladder, because we don't need, with the bigger tenders we were getting, they determined we could go out with 1 less tender, and then the fire truck would actually can also act as an engine. The reason they're looking at the ladder is because it's kind of it's a growth issue. One of the things Pequot Lakes was looking for, you probably saw in the news a couple months ago, they have a hotel development coming in, and they were looking to go above the 30-foot minimum or maximum that Pequot had. They agreed to extend it up to 45 feet because that's what the hotel was looking at. Problem is the fire district does not have any piece of equipment that can reach that high. Right now, the biggest thing they got is a 30-foot ladder. So there are actually structures in Pequot and in Breezy right now that there is no way from the outside the district can reach the top of that structure, which becomes a big hazard when it comes to fighting a fire. So that's where that came in, looking at, okay, is kind of a cost of doing business, of growth, is you got to start looking at equipment that can fight fires in such structures. So that's where that came in. Originally, the Joint Powers Board had directed the chief to spec out a truck that he would then order the truck, knowing that it'd probably be about 2 years since we got one. Well, the opportunity came up for the district to purchase a truck that actually was already in, I guess not production.
Yeah.
The truck will be used as a demo first, so the supplier takes the truck, takes it around to different events to demo it, and then they sell it. It's a fully operational truck, spec'd out. It's kind of pretty much everything that we would be looking for. Doesn't have all the bells and whistles. Chief was very open. We don't need bells and whistles. But it was actually an opportunity to buy a truck. The pricing of that truck was actually 2021 pricing, because that's when they started building it. If we ordered one today, we'd be ordering it at 2023 pricing. So the opportunity was about a little over 1.4 million for a truck that we otherwise would not be able to purchase. If we tried to purchase that truck today, it'd be almost $1.9 million. So the Joint Powers Board did decide to move forward with that. The one catch is that the Joint Powers Board as a special district actually does not have any, it's a truck that would be bonded for, but the money that's going in the capital plan would pay for that and future expenditures as well. Does not have any bonding authority. So one of the entities, one of the members has to bond for it on behalf of the district. And then there'd be a JPA between the district and the other member, joint, whoever isn't the bonding entity, to cover those costs. At this point, we're recommending that as we're going to be the fiscal agent, this time round be the city of Breezy Point. And then in a joint powers agreement with Pequot Lakes, our municipal advisors have recommended that a joint powers agreement actually be with the city of Pequot Lakes, not necessarily the fire district, just because that way, if say Pequot were to decide to leave the district at any time, they're not free of that. They would still be bound to the paying for their part of that truck. How that whole works, if everyone still pays the fire district and the fire district pays the check, that can all be figured out. So what I'm getting at, this is really just to inform you that this is going on, and in a future meeting, we're gonna have all those details for you. And so I'm working with our municipal advisors right now on all that looks like. We're in a really good spot to do this right now from a city's perspective. So I don't really have any concerns there, but those are all details that'll get ironed out over the next couple months of what that agreement looks like and all of that jazz. But the intent here is that it's not any increase on what we just budgeted for that. Our contribution to the district covers the cost of the truck. So it's just about the administrative process of who's the entity actually buying the truck. As we talked to our municipal advisors, if it was the city of Breezy Point, we would technically own the truck per the agreement until it was paid off, and then at that point it would be going over to be given to the district. But all details, just letting you know that is going to be coming in future meetings, more information about that.
It'd be nice to, in thinking about it, see an agreement have a clause in there that the participating entities have to place an escrow X amount of time ahead of the payment, the monies.
Okay.
I mean, if we're gonna legitimately look at the city of Breezy Point issuing a bond for this, and at the end of the day, the taxpayer is being responsible for that, that's some additional assurances in my mind to make sure that we're not getting
Absolutely, and that's why I talked to municipal advisors. That's why they said the joint powers agreement shouldn't be with the district, it should be with the other partner city, so that at no point would one entity be held holding a bag. And in all of those other costs, it's not just the cost of the truck, but the cost of issuing the bonds, the cost of reports on the bonds, all of that be in there. Also, one of the things we discussed when I had my initial discussion with them to kind of get my head around how this all works is also you look at, obviously, Breezy shouldn't be, if we have to do this again in the future for a future truck, shouldn't be the ones to always have to pick up that part of how are we going to divvy this up in the future, so it's not Breezy using all of our bonding authority every single time for the district. We're divvying this up and we're sharing this burden.
Right. Okay, thank you. Any other council reports? No?
I don't think so.
All right.
I'll just mention quickly that for the fire district, we did do interviews for 3 additional firefighters, And the recommendation from the Personnel Committee is to have the Joint Powers Board approve those hires, assuming all the background checks go through, so.
Perfect. Glad to hear. I think we needed 6, right? 3 down.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. I mean,
I think this would bring
another
us,
3 will
I think
definitely
this would
help.
bring
I
us
think
up
it might
to
be
like 26 or
more
27.
that we have now.
I think we have budgeted for, the district has 30 budgeted, or is authorized for 30, and these 3 would bring us up to 26 or 27.
That sounds right, because we've had some leave, yeah.
Perfect. All right. Agenda forecast, do we have any?
Yep, just very quickly, it's just a few items. October, looking at, obviously, we're bringing back the cannabis ordinance. We mentioned before, organizational assessment RFP should be before you for consideration. Also, there's an item that would have been before you tonight. White Birch has requested a rezoning on some of their properties on Chickasaw Circle, that right abut the White Birch Golf Course. Rezoning those from R1 to R4 to do a townhome development. That the Planning Commission did submit a recommendation to approve that rezoning. The quest was they're currently, part of this whole thing is per R4 requirements for a multifamily. They have to have access to sewer. So they have been in the process. We've been working with the engineer, and they're kind of looking at the finance side of it, of the costs and everything. And so they just asked for that to be pushed, that final decision to be pushed to October, should they decide that the project in that arrangement isn't where they want it to be financially and they want to do something else. They'd rather just know that before the council formally approves the rezoning.
Are they looking to the city to pay some of the costs of the sewer?
We're having that discussion. And what what would be a fair, there is some benefit to the city to that. One of the discussions we've had would be the benefit of bringing sewer to the cul-de-sac where that on Chickasaw, so that in the future, if the city wanted to, maybe next time Chickasaw is redone, you could extend sewer so that it would already be there. But that's a ongoing conversation before we would bring that back to the council for any kind of discussion or consideration. So.
All right, thank you. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, guys.